All right. Well, as you guys get settled, we just wanted to welcome you to this wonderful space. Keith here would like to tell you a little bit more about it. So please move forward, come to the seats up here, and we'll get started.
Thank you. Well, I am Keith Waits. I'm the operations director of Louisville Visual Art, and this is our home. We moved in here in 2015, and in just the last year, we did some important renovations, so that like the bathrooms and the steps and the doors and things like that, so that we can have something like this happen in the building. We are an organization that's been around since 1909, the oldest nonprofit visual arts or arts of any kind in the state. We have many, many programs, children's fine art class programs that have been going since 1925. We do artist resource series to develop things for adult artists. We do gallery exhibits. This exhibit you're looking at right now is an artist that lives in New Albany named Kevin Rose Schultz. These are cyanotypes, cameraless photography. They are up now as a part of the 2023 photo biennial, which means almost every gallery in the city in southern Indiana was showing photography through the end of October. I also want to just mention to you that we are also in the middle, for us, of an important part of the year. It's the Open Studio. We have 2 Saturdays where artists participate. They open their studios up to the public. On our table there, right where you walk in, there are brochures that list all the artists and their locations, and it's happening again this Saturday, 12 to 6. So if you take the brochure or you download our list, you don't have, doesn't cost you anything to do it, and it's a way for you to get to know local artists in town. Yeah, I should talk more directly into this microphone. Anyway, I also want to mention one of the reasons this came about was our board president, Beverly Cote, who's a wonderful board member who I've worked with for many years, is also on this council. So that's sort of the connection that was made here. I'm kind of looking for her, and I don't see her. I was going to ask her to raise her hand. Oh, she's at the back. She's trying to hide. Yeah, but anyway, Beverly Cote is sort of the connection that made all this happen. And I want to thank Nick Johnson for being like really, really easy to work with and a reasonable, nice guy. And this has all been a really pleasurable experience. We're very happy to have you here. Thank you, and I'll turn the microphone back over.
Thank you, Keith. I'd like to bring up Ellen and Stuart.
Hello. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to stand at the podium or down here. All right. Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the 2023 Louisville Sustainability Summit. Yay! All right. I'm so glad to see everyone in person, all your smiling faces, and in this wonderful space from LVA. Sorry, I need to hold this really close to my face. I'm your chair, Ellen Trahan, and I'm still just getting over the fact that we are in person. The last time we did this was at the zoo in 2019. It feels like it's been a million years, but it's only been 3 or 4 years. So it's been tough in a lot of ways to be, virtual. So I'm really thankful and delighted to be with you guys, communing with you in this beautiful space. Just like everyone else, the Louisville Sustainability Council has seen many changes over the last few years. One of the biggest changes the LSC has seen recently is the addition of our new executive director, Stuart. Many of you all know Stuart already. He's been very involved in the Louisville sustainability scene, and he's the co-founder of Evolve Kentucky. We're so excited about having him with us to continue pushing us forward into a more sustainable future. Stuart, you want to tell people about what we're doing today?
Hello and welcome everybody. I'll make this really efficient, given what we're doing here. We are running a little bit behind time, and I know Rian's going to say later that we need to kind of pick things up, so I'll try to make this quick. But we're focusing on the built environment. I've really been happy with everybody being so welcoming from the LSC board. I've been meeting with all the board members. I've been meeting with people in the community, and that's been wonderful. It's just, there really is a need for an organization like LSC, and it's just amazing to have this kind of energy in a room. This week it's gonna be 4 months, so I'm really new. but I've been going to LSC summits and events for quite some time, and that's the most exciting thing is to kind of be in the room and connecting. Today we're going to be hearing some amazing speakers and panelists, national level, local level, doing important things, and I think it's in my contract that I have to say connect and convene at least once or twice. That's what we do. We connect and convene, and that's important. It's like planting the seeds so that something can grow, and action is very important too. I mean, we're talking about, you know, serious problems with climate change and all this depressing news, and we really can make a difference on a local level, but it starts out with connecting and convening. And some of these connections, I mean, I've been going around just like all of you with people at the tables, and I'm like, oh, I've connected with you, and we've done something important together, and that's a great feeling. So moving forward, I'm really seeing like wonderful things for the new year. You know, building on the success that we've had with the board. I mean, Nick has been working tirelessly for this event and for green drinks, which I've been a big fan of for a long time. Solar over Louisville, partnerships there, big success. You'll be hearing a little later about our mini grant program, our micro grant program. We're doing some important things, but I think there are also even more important and bigger things on the horizon for us. And it's always been my thought that in the world of sustainability, you really have to invite everybody to the table. And I think moving forward, that's something that we're going to spend a lot of time and focus on. I totally went off script, which is a good thing. I now have the pleasure. Oh, did you have another? I do. Oh, okay. Oh, I really went off script.
No, that's all right. So I just want to acknowledge our sponsors. The LSC is at its heart a community organization, and it consists of volunteers and sponsors and community members that make us what we are. All of our sponsors made today possible, so I want to thank Kroger, Brown-Forman, Louisville Metro Office of Sustainability, Sociable Weavers Foundation, LG&E, Westrock, AIA Kentucky, Rotary Club of Louisville, and Terracon. We'd also like to thank our volunteers and community partners who gave of their time and resources to make today fun and enjoyable. Heine Brothers, Creation Gardens, Pure Tap, Farm to Fork, and Rainbow Blossom. There you go.
And also, you know, moving forward, LSC now has 2 full-time staff members. It's a big commitment for the group. So if there are any folks out here, we want like-minded organizations and groups to help sponsor us and you know, support us. So don't feel bad about, you know, grabbing me or any of the board and starting that conversation. So we really appreciate it. I now have the pleasure of introducing to you our MC for today. Maureen Hunt is the Global Sustainability Analyst at Yum Brands and also the co-chair of the Summit Committee. Welcome, Maureen.
Thank you both very much. Thank you all for being here. I hope you're as excited as I am and the other team members are, because as it's been said already, this is our first time being together in a very long time for this event. So I know you all have met one another back there, and hopefully you'll continue to do so, but if you want to take a minute and introduce yourself to your neighbor, go right ahead. Okay, that's it. I said a minute. That's a minute. Thank you, everybody. I'm so happy that you guys are making new friends and connections. Thank you. Thank you for I really did mean a minute. As Stuart mentioned, we are running a little bit behind, and so we are going to keep it a tight ship. So don't mind me. my name is Maureen Hunt, but I go by Reen. So if you see me around, please feel free to introduce yourself. We have some incredible speakers lined up for you, representing local, regional, national work that spans energy efficiency, housing, community engagement and empowerment, and so much more. So we're in for a really great treat today. Not only for our minds, but also for our bodies. Farm to Fork and many other sponsors, Rainbow Blossom, Creation Gardens, Heine Brothers, Louisville Water Company have provided refreshments for us today. And Farm to Fork will be providing our heavy hors d'oeuvres over at our after party. Yes, right? I know, yummy. Just a few things before we really dive in. Just in case of an emergency, obviously that's not going to happen, but just in case, there are exits located at the back of the room. There's also a third one over by the exhibitor tables. And lastly, there is one behind here. But we do ask that you try to stay on this side of the beautiful art, right? We want you to see the art, not behind it. But should there be a need, there is another exit over there. Bathrooms are located where the orange light is, so feel free to go back there. There's also a water fountain back there if you want as well. But we have wonderful, delicious water from Louisville Water Company. So we are making, we are going to make up some time and have a tight ship. So I do want to be cognizant of that. I want you all to be cognizant of that. But I also realize that we all are humans and we have needs. And if you need to take a break, please feel free, whatever you need to do. There are breaks throughout the event, but you do what you need to do. We are recording today, so you will have access to this information. So don't feel like you won't miss it or that you won't miss it. If you have any questions during our presentations, we ask that you keep them towards the end, and we ask that you be succinct in asking your questions. So keep that in mind. This will also be a waste-free event, thanks to West Rock. Thank you, West Rock. Just a quick point of order on that. The green bins are recycling, so you can put your cups and bottles or anything like that. Also, the blue bins are recycling. The brown bins are for any food waste and napkins. So please distribute your waste appropriately. If you have any logistical questions throughout the day, Stuart is available. Stuart, raise your hand. Great, you all saw him. Ellen, who is also around here, you saw her. Nick, can you raise your hand in the back? And Kim, Kim in the pink sweater. So if you have any other questions that you need, they're there to help. One final note, before our after party and art exhibit is just across the street at 1512 from 5 to 7. So please come hang out after our summit. We're going to have a really awesome parade with the puppets that you see back there, the fire, earth, wind, and water. There's going to be food, like I mentioned, a cash bar, and of course, an art exhibit that was curated specifically for our event. So, I think those are all the points of order. Okay, great. Nobody said anything. We're good. Okay, so without further ado, I'm honored to introduce our keynote speaker, Jen Bloom-Leone. As Chief Sustainability Officer for New York City's Department of Housing, Preservation, and Development, which is the largest municipal developer of affordable housing in the country, Jennifer's work includes setting a holistic sustainability agenda and policy for the agency, ensuring that the housing, preservation, and development projects and portfolio can meet New York City's ambitious climate goals while addressing the unique health and safety needs of the vulnerable populations they support. Jennifer serves as NYC's Affordable Housing Liaison on critical climate policy and legislation, in addition to developing policies and programs to support building decarbonization and electrification. Key initiatives include development of HPD's low carbon and climate resilient design guidelines, a $24 million retrofit electrification pilot, and a $15 million future housing initiative. Oh, and finally, the Solar Where Feasible program, how could I forget, which as of August 2023 supported over 12 million megawatts of cost-effective solar across HPD's development projects. So, if we can all give a warm welcome to Jen.
Good afternoon. I guess you can hear me. I can hear me, right? Awesome. Also, there's seats up in the front row. I'm not going to call on anybody, so, right, if you need a chair. Okay, so the only problem is making sure the slides advance. So hi, thank you for that great introduction. You actually gave away a lot of the information in my deck, which will save time. That's great. So I want to talk about the work we've been doing in New York City. I think a lot of folks maybe know that the city has a pretty ambitious climate agenda and climate legislation, but I want to talk about what we're doing and how we got there. And I'm going to try and leave room for questions, but please, if anyone wants to talk to me or ask me questions at any point later on today or at drinks, I'd love to hear them and talk more. Let's see if I can get this to work. It was really reflecting off the ceiling, but it doesn't seem to be doing that now. Next slide. Thank you. So Reen talked a little bit about what I do in New York City. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer at what's virtually a housing finance agency for the city, and we're one of the few citywide housing finance agencies in the country. We do a lot of work, right? Our, historical average is about 16,000 units of affordable housing every year, split between preservation of existing housing and creation of new buildings and new affordable housing. We don't own housing, right? We work with developers to get this work done, and that's a really important thing to note, right? Our assets aren't really our assets. Next slide. We are part of a really important and collaborative ecosystem in New York City. There's a number of housing agencies that work in the space. We have our sister state agency, HCR, the Public Housing Authority, NYCHA, and you'll hear me refer to these partners, so just keep them in mind. We have our bonding agency that supports a lot of the work we do. And then we have our mayoral agencies, right? The Climate and Environmental Justice, Climate and Environmental Justice, they keep changing the name. Department of Health, Department of Buildings, Department of Sanitation, and we do a lot of work collaboratively, right? We all have the same goals. We work with our development partners and industry working groups. Obviously, the residents of our housing are part of the stakeholder ecosystem. And finally, and I'm gonna talk about them a lot, but our state energy office in New York is incredibly powerful and incredibly forward-thinking, and it's gonna come up over and over. Next slide. So I'm gonna talk a lot about housing, partly because that's what I know most about. But what's also interesting is housing has been leading the way in the past few years in New York City, right? We do a lot of housing. We have really good partnerships with the State Energy Authority to fund the work, but we've really been trying to advance the cause of climate mitigation and climate adaptation across the work we do. Next slide. And it's really important. New York City is a buildings-dominated emissions profile, right? Most of our emissions, more than 2/3, come from buildings, right? I mean, I imagine a lot of people have been in New York City, you know what it's like. But of the building stock, 2/3 of that is represented by housing, and more than half of that housing stock is affordable, right? So we have a huge piece of that carbon emissions puzzle to solve as housing agency people. Next slide. Like Louisville, and sorry if I mess up the name, climate change in New York City, we're seeing it already today. We've been seeing it for many years. Flooding, sea level rise, flooding related to sea level rise, and frankly, just a shit ton of rain that falls and floods everything. Excuse my language. The subways fill up, low-lying areas are basements are flooding, people are dying, and that's today, and it's a huge problem, right? We also have increasing heat, longer heat waves, lots of hot places, urban heat island almost everywhere you look. And recently, we never thought wildfires were a big issue in New York City. The smoke from the Canadian wildfires made our city look like this, completely orange over the summer. So new risks are emerging all the time. Next slide. It's getting worse, of course. We have really good projections of future climate risk in New York City, and I'll talk about why we have them. But temperatures could rise as much as 10 degrees by 2080, right? Precipitation increasing by 19%, and sea level rise 39 inches by 2080s. That's a lot. We're super coastal, right? And we're already too hot and too wet. So this is a really big problem, right? And it's just going to make things worse and worse. And that's true of everywhere. Next slide. HPD, that's HPD, Housing Preservation and Development, my agency. We have a pretty good record and have had a pretty good record of green buildings already, right? Like 5 years ago, 10 years ago, we've been doing pretty nice stuff. And obviously this is the best of what we do. I'm not showing the less compelling projects, but everything from vanilla building retrofits to, LEED Gold, LEED Platinum, and even a few passive house projects, and a really cute net zero modular project, which is atypical in New York City. So we work across the spectrum of new and old, small and large, and so on. Next slide. But this one by one kind of voluntary approach was definitely not enough. We weren't going to get to the really ambitious climate goals. We weren't going to solve climate with just the way we were doing things. Next slide. Excuse me for 1 second. They did say, bring a bottle, which I did. So how are we going to get this done, right? How are we going to get to the next level in New York City? Next slide. When our current mayor came into office, he committed through a blueprint for housing and homelessness to address a lot of issues related to this sector, right? And it's housing people, affordable housing crisis, a housing crisis at large, homelessness, and so on. But our agency worked closely with the mayor's office teams and tried to embed commitments about climate into this work, right? If you get it in writing, you get it into a report, somehow you're then compelled to do it, right? So we knew that if we could get our mission and goals embedded into the blueprint, right, we could have a working roadmap. A couple of the big key things we got in there are to fast track equitable decarbonization and beneficial electrification in low and moderate income housing. And important, key here is that beneficial electrification. Probably a lot of people know what I'm talking about, but we want to make sure that when we're transitioning from fossil fuels, that we do no harm, right? We don't increase energy costs, we don't overburden the grid, we don't have a great grid in New York City, and we don't actually inadvertently create pollution in neighborhoods that are already overburdened, right? So that was really important to us. And we had to outline how we might actually achieve these goals. So a couple things, we were gonna incubate new ideas, right? Test them out around beneficial electrification and resiliency, and release sustainable design guidelines, which Reen already sort of mentioned. And I want to talk a little bit more about those. Next slide. We knew this was going to be really hard, right? A couple categorically challenging issues in New York City. They might plague Louisville. We have a really dirty grid, or CRID, according to my slide. We have really high construction costs, and I'm not at liberty to even talk about that, right? Because it's private information. But we also have really high electricity costs. And finally, our buildings are really old, right? And the buildings that we're gonna have in 2050, 2080 are there now, most of them. Next slide. So I'm gonna talk about a couple of these initiatives, these spotlight initiatives where we were gonna demonstrate and innovate, which you already heard about, but I want to talk in a little more detail because they're really, really important for where we are and where we're going. Our Solar Where Feasible program, this is like one of my babies, right? It's my first program. at the agency. But in 2019, the city created a new law stating that all new roofs, so new construction, new roof assemblies, had to have solar on them, except were deemed infeasible by my agency for affordable housing. Now, I didn't write that law. We didn't necessarily want a carve out for solar, but it came down and we had to solve this problem. And I had no idea like how we were gonna determine what's feasible or not for the 16,000 units of housing that we do. So we thought, let's try and get creative and solve the problem, but actually turn the problem into an opportunity. So we teamed up with NYSERDA, the state energy office, asked for some funding, and we created a program to assess feasibility of solar on all of our development projects. To do that, we built some tools, and it's not that hard. And don't forget, like, there are a lot of incentives for solar, and this even predates the IRA and the new incentives we're seeing. Solar in New York City is almost free in some cases, right? So we didn't have to work that hard, we just have to prove the case. So we got technical support, we created all these tools and trainings, and now all of the projects that do this assessment, and they all need to do it, solar is required if the payback is 10 years or less. And that happens a lot, right? Given all the incentives that are available. So we just had to unlock that, right? And make it happen. And in that effort, we've already supported over 12 megawatts of solar on our projects, and we're still going. That's only part of the way there. And the idea is, right, we've taught so many people how to think about solar and optimize solar that it's now pretty much business as usual, at least in affordable housing. And I hate to say it, but market rate housing is not following along, right? Like, we're leading that charge because we gave people the tools, we showed them how it's possible. And it's also really interesting because our naturally conservative bonding agency partners were like, this will never work, we don't agree, you can't do solar, blah, blah, blah. And now when projects come in saying that they're infeasible, they call me and say, how do we get solar? Like, we need to have solar on these projects, right? So we've really, I don't know, changed hearts and minds, and that's pretty cool. Next slide. Everybody, drink break. So another initiative, a little bit more recent, was to think about how we could start to strategically electrify our building stock, right? I said it before, our buildings are dinosaurs. I don't know if this is true here, but most of our existing buildings have steam heating, right? Fossil fueled boilers, right? No insulation, and they're often partly or fully masonry. So they're really hard to electrify. And remember, when I'm talking about electrification, I'm talking about heat pumps, not like the bad kind of electrification, right? So how could we start getting buildings to do this? And how do we make sure it's done beneficially and smartly? And how do we learn from it and try and normalize this like we did for solar? So again, we went back, hands out to our state energy agency, asking for money. And they gave us $24 million to create a pilot. And again, technical support, this time direct incentives, right? This stuff doesn't really pencil out yet, but we need to make it happen, and we need straight up grants to do it. So we're really focused on buildings where the economic viability is there. Buildings on oil, buildings where equipment is in basements that are subject to flooding, electric resistance heated buildings, which we don't have many of. And we're really focusing where it makes sense to do this. And it's across different building sizes, types, rental and ownership properties, and we're allowing a number of different heat pump typologies in the buildings as see fit. So far, we've allocated almost half the funding in 21 buildings. These are some of them. And we're in the process of putting out our first round of lessons learned and data, right? And this is really important because everyone else is talking about electrification, and we're the ones who know how to do it, right? So these lessons are really important for this kind of work to happen elsewhere. Next slide. The next initiative, this is kind of, and I hate to say it, but the easy stuff, but passive house, all electric new construction. And like, raise your hand if you think that's easy, right? It's not that easy, but like in terms of the context of New York City, it's a hell of a lot easier than doing it on old buildings, right? And we can use this And we could really spur the growth of really high-performing buildings because we have a grid problem, right? And we need to make sure that we're also messaging efficiency-first approaches, right? And it's hard on our old buildings, but we need to be making sure that on our new construction that that's happening. So again, very rich grants. Now these will sunset over time. We don't expect to always pay this, but our goal is really to get the developing partnerships to think about Passive House, and we have technical support to help them not have to go through the first-timer lessons, right? If you've done Passive House once, it's expensive and tricky. Second time, it's easier, and by the third time, they say it's free. I don't necessarily buy that, but we're trying to leapfrog over those, the first project problem. 8 buildings were awarded funding. Just recently we announced these, and we have another round coming up in the winter. Next slide. The other thing we committed to were design guidelines, right? And this is a big deal, right? We do a lot of buildings. We get to write the rules, and we get to write the rules because we provide a huge amount of subsidy in addition to other sources of housing funding. So if you want our money, you do what we tell. This was a huge effort, right? We worked with all of our sister agencies to embed best practices and current laws, but also to start to set into place our goals for electrification, decarbonization, and we did this by establishing mandatory criteria and REACH criteria. And REACH criteria representing where we want to go, best practices, the gold standard, and baseline being bare minimum. And what's really important is previously our preservation projects, which are more than half of what we do, had really no standards and guidelines at all. So people were doing work and it didn't always include efficiency, and that is obviously not something we want to promote. So we were able to embed efficiency and health and safety in all of our work. Next slide. Just a couple key items in the guidelines, just for reference. In our moderate rehabs, which are kind of low-touch renovations, finally, prescriptive energy conservation measures. Healthy items like low VOC materials, integrated pest management to reduce toxins and pests on site, which reduces allergens and fear, frankly. And solar, we were able to integrate our lessons learned into that pipeline. For our more substantial rehabs where heating systems are being replaced, enterprise green or LEED gold as a threshold criteria, strategic electrification and solar on projects, and this is where we're saying, if you're on oil, on electric resistance and so on, you have to start electrifying your building. And we now have a pilot to support those costs. And then other resiliency and health items like mandatory cooling for seniors. And of course, resiliency and risk screening. We want everybody to think first about risk and then design to address it. Next slide. For new construction, it's more ambitious, right? Same enterprise green or LEED gold threshold, which we've been doing for a long time, but buildings now must be all electric and must be flood safe using flood-proof materials. Our REACH standards, Passive House or zero energy, DOE zero energy. Whoops, next slide. We use our RFP process to message what we want to see as a REACH criteria. Next slide. How did we get here? Next slide. We've had a lot of top-down support from the mayors and the governors. Next slide. I'm not going to walk all the way through our roadmaps because I know we don't have a lot of time, but in 2007, Mayor Bloomberg set a forward-looking agenda for what we need to do and how we're going to get there. And it started with a plan to reduce emissions 30%. Fast forward a couple of years, we got 80% by 2050 as the next goalpost. And a lot of the plans since then are how are we going to get there, right? How are we going to meet these ambitious goals? Current administration, literally the plan is get it done. No new rules, but let's achieve and figure out how to get all the other goals integrated. Next slide. Couple of really important climate laws, which is We had to start benchmarking our buildings way back in 2009, and that's a really big deal, right? You can't do anything if you don't have data. The Green Building Standard for city-funded building went into effect in 2016, and then Climate Mobilization Act and Local Law 97 of 2019. Has anyone heard of this? It's a big deal. It's like the most ambitious climate legislation set of rules in the country, might still be. But the Keystone Initiative here and the Keystone Law is that all buildings over 25,000 square feet, which is all buildings we benchmark, right, have to start reducing their GHG emissions, right? And there are articulated caps that get lower and lower through 2050, or pay huge penalties if they don't comply. So it's a carbon tax, and it's scary and it's big, and almost everybody has to do it. Following up, we have a fossil fuel phase-out law, right? So new buildings can no longer use fossil fuels at all except backup power, starting in 2024 and fully by the end of 2027, right? So these are the laws that allowed us to write the guidelines, because we want to be ahead of all these laws. And then some additional rules around resiliency. Next slide. This is just a map, just to kind of show people that this is like an increasingly rigorous, complex web of climate laws. Next. The state got into the action with their Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. Next slide. So in 2019, they signed this Climate Act, and they have a couple key goals. 2 million electric or electric-ready homes by 2030, 100% clean grid by 2040, and then an 85% reduction in overall carbon by 2050. Without the third bullet point, clean grid, none of this would work anyway. So for us as a city, we can't get there without the state taking action. Next slide. Couple of carrots besides sticks I'd like to mention. Next slide. NYSERDA, the State Energy Office. I just want to kind of tell you guys a little bit more about what they're doing. All states have them. I don't know if they're all so effective, but they do everything from running incentive programs to large-scale energy planning for the state, workforce development, and then they spur a huge amount of innovation through their funding efforts. Next slide. We have a city building accelerator that helps building owners figure out how to comply with these complicated laws, help them make their buildings more efficient, and so on. And this is really important because there's not enough feet on the ground without this. Next slide. And climate hubs. This is super important. We have to have a place where people can meet and greet and talk and share all of their lessons learned. And these are just a tiny % of the events and reports that our Climate Energy Hub offers. A lot of them are ours. They come from our agency. They're our projects and our trainings. And I'm there a lot, in fact, right? Because there's always so much to talk about. Next slide. What comes next? Just a few more slides. I hope I'm not super over time. All right, how do we get all the way to 2050? We're not there yet. Next slide. We've got an ambitious roadmap, right? We're gonna keep making more of our REACH goals mandatory, right? Through 2050 and keep ratcheting up our own goals. Next slide. There's a lot of technologies, and I really wanna make sure that people are focused on the fact that what we have now to decarbonize buildings is not enough. We need the new stuff. We need induction stoves that have battery backup so you don't have to upgrade an entire building electric service just to electrify cooking. Same thing, we've got these cool new window heat pumps that are funded through NYSERDA that are coming onto the market. Really plug and play electrification. If that works, it's a game changer. A couple other things I won't go into because they're less critical. Next slide. A lot of solutions on the data side, and I'd love to talk to folks about this more later, but I'm not going to go into detail. But leveraging data to make smart decisions and better tools for people is really important. Next slide. And of course, Inflation Reduction Act. We all have our eyes on this, and we're hoping that it's going to bring us what we need. Next slide. Okay, last thing, and I promise I'm going to stop talking after this. I asked all of my really smart climate friends, which is basically all the people doing what I do in New York City, what should I tell the folks in Louisville, right? Like, I can't just talk about what we did. It's a different place, it's a different time. What are the messages? Next slide. First one, you're never gonna satisfy everybody. There's so much pushback on the laws we do, right? And we're a blue city and a blue state. There's always gonna be issues when you go fast and do new things. Next slide. You're definitely gonna get things wrong. I don't think I have to say more about this. Next slide. You gotta have data, right? And if there's one thing, I don't know if Louisville is benchmarking, but you gotta start collecting data, because without it, you can't do anything. You can't manage what you can't measure, and that's where we started. And it's data from every source. Super critical. Next slide. Innovation is super important. I already talked about that. Next slide. And collaboration. And this is why everybody's here. This is exactly what happens. You get everybody in the room, you talk to everybody, you innovate with everybody. You can't get anywhere without talking to your state energy office, your government officials, the people who do things, make things, and so on. Next slide. And the next. And these are just my words, not from the experts, but just for me, right? Everyone always says it's a marathon, not a sprint, but it's both, right? You can't wait till later to finish this up. You gotta start fast and do it now. Next slide. I already said this in other words. You gotta plant the seeds today, right? The tree will not grow. You won't be there if you don't start this. Next slide. And that's it. But leapfrogging, right? Like, we're all in the room trying to learn from the other guy. It's so important that you see what other people are doing. Anything you can learn, anything you can leverage from other cities and other places will get you there way faster. That's it. Okay. Not leaving.
So thank you so much, Jen. That was very inspiring. It's so cool to hear everything that NYC is doing, and I am here to open the floor up to people who might have questions. Oh, there's one in the back.
Where does Con Ed fit in all this? Is this good for them? Is this bad for them? How do they play ball?
So that's a really, really good question. Con Ed, for everyone who doesn't know, is one of our utilities in New York City and in other parts of the state. They're an electric utility that also provides gas. We work with them. They get a lot of ratepayer funding, right? So they collect money from ratepayers to do incentives. They have been active in sort of the less innovative part of the space, right? So if you just want to do simple efficiency work, Con Ed's who you go to, right? They've been trying really hard to do deeper incentives around electrification. They have a clean heat program, right, to fund heat pumps. They're not as successful at really the big picture stuff, right, because they're more like acting like utilities. They don't know how to do the really hard stuff. That's where they fit in. They've been really collaborative with us, creating better incentives, right? For instance, we asked them if we could have heat pump incentives that were based on the size of, or the number of apartments in a building, rather than MMBTU or energy savings, and they're starting to do that. So I don't know what it's like here, but a collaborative approach with them is great, but they're not as passionate about this as like the state energy office. I hope that answered your question, but we could talk more about that.
I'm just curious where you all have found the sweet spot or the good compromise between historic preservation and energy efficiency and putting clean energy into historic buildings.
That's a really good question. Historically, no pun intended, in New York City, there's been a real resistance to putting in efficient windows or doing anything to change the building, and that's been a big problem. Sadly, maybe, it's often a rich person problem, right? A lot of our historic buildings are in wealthier neighborhoods, and it's not so much in my world, but it makes it that much more difficult. We don't have a lot of There hasn't been enough work on that sphere, right, to make it happen, but recently someone really important from the sustainability space is now sitting as a commissioner on the landmarks preservation entity so that they can start to tackle these problems and make the case that yes, it's okay to have the invisible side of your building stuccoed and EFISed or whatever it needs to be, or anything out of sight really should be allowed. So we're making baby steps, but it's not easy.
So I saw 2 more hands, and then we will wrap it up. But Jennifer will be here all day, so please ask questions to her. Do you want this, or?
You mentioned Con Ed, and also I was interested just in general, do you have much robust analysis as to the impact of this ambitious electrification process, and not only the whole grid, but then issues that might come up with individual substations and buildings impacted by this great increase in electrification?
There's been a huge amount of study by the utilities and the city. Like, do we have a robust enough grid to support electrification? Con Ed and the utilities say we do. We're not 100% sure that will happen, but coming from the top, there's a pretty much assured certainty that by the time electrification really scales, right, and we're starting to hit winter peaking from heat pumps, that the grid will be ready for it. I can't guarantee that's true. It's really case by case. We don't have really good transparent maps in neighborhoods to say that this substation or that interconnection's really robust enough for a particular project. So there's going to be a lot of bumps on the road at that scale. But they keep telling us that it's fine. So we're going to keep moving that direction.
I think you had one question, sir.
I really like the roadmap you've shown us of having a plan where you have reach goals, and then in a little while those become the requirements. That strikes me as a very intelligent approach, and I hope we can try to do that here in Louisville. I think the question I'll ask you is, I assume that, like most places, New York City is gradually getting renewable energy into its electrification mix. Could you tell us a bit how fast that movement to clean generation is going in New York City?
Okay, I'm not an expert in the clean energy plan, but I track it, right? The city's tracking it. We have a huge solar farm that's going to be really, really major, coming from out of the state down to New York City. Timelines by 2030, I'm told. I don't know if you remember, but we had a map, right? The state is very clean. There's a lot of hydropower from Niagara Falls, and it's downstate where New York City is that it's still dirty. But there's so much activity on offshore wind, which we are pretty close to, and distributed solar, right? There's a big push in the city to get solar on all buildings. That's not going to be much in New York City, but to start to reduce the impact. So it's happening. There's a lot of effort to push for that. I don't know how fast, but we are told 2040 we'll have a clean grid.
Well, thank you so much, Jen. Let's give her another round of applause. Thank you. Oh. I'm sure everybody has, a gazillion questions they could ask, and I'm sure they're all wonderful. So she will be here. Please, yes, everybody. Yes, and she'll be here for drinks. So you can find her at the bar. Just kidding. But please, utilize her. We're happy she's here. We're going to take a very short break. You've got like 2 minutes, so go to the bathroom, get some water. And will the panelists come up for the first panel, please? Kim, are we okay? We okay? All right. All right. So I hope everybody got some delicious food from our wonderful donation partners. Maybe got to have a bio break, but like I mentioned earlier, please do what you need to do. We are recording this. So I am so pleased to introduce you to our new, well, I shouldn't say new, I just meant next group of panelists and our moderator. This session is our housing for a changed climate session. So the impact of climate change affects all Louisvillians, all of us, and the places we live and work have significant impact on our ability to respond to the anticipated shocks and stressors of climate change. These panelists are going to discuss the need for and the benefits of healthy, sustainable, and affordable housing, local and federal financial incentives, design strategies, and development approaches necessary to deliver healthy housing equitably. Try saying that 5 times fast, while adding value to our city. If we could, again, we're very happy that everybody is networking and talking, but if we could bring that down just a little bit, that would be great. What? Okay. Oh, thank you. Somebody went to camp. I did too, and that's exactly what we do. Clap once if you can hear me, right? Clap twice if you can hear me. Great. Clap 3 times if you can hear me. Everybody go wooga booga if you can hear me. Okay, great. All right, thank you. Thanks, everyone. Okay, our panelists are Marilyn Harris, Director of Development, Director, the Department of Housing and Community Development at Louisville Metro Government. She previously served as the Director of Develop Louisville and as the Director of the Office of Housing. She holds a Bachelor's of Science in Sociology and a Master's of Social Administration from Bellarmine College. Ben Eilerman, Director of Real Estate Development at Over the Rhine Community Housing, where he leads affordable housing development projects through concept, funding, construction, and occupancy. He's LEED certified and a licensed architect, and is my fellow Cincinnatian for today. Tiffany Broyles-Yost, the Director of Sustainability and Resilience at GBBN, as well as an AIA member, LEED AP BD+C certified. I'm not an architect. And a Fitwel ambassador. As GBBN's Director of Sustainability and Resilience, Tiffany provides strategic leadership for sustainable design across the firm's portfolio of projects and spearheads initiatives related to resilience and well-being, including GBBN's Sustainability Action Network. Her work includes sustainable design on projects from international super tall mixed use to existing building renovations in 20+ countries. She's focused on creating, yes, whoever clapped, that's yes. Tiffany is focused on creating low carbon, healthy spaces at GBBN and advancing a circular economy locally. Our moderator is Kessa Herron. She's a proud Kentuckian and a community development professional and public policy activist who has over 20 years of experience working on projects at the intersections of community and economic development, food, and the built environment. And she those connections transform local food systems and the energy economy. Kessa works as a planning and strategy advisor and freelance writer with an expertise in organizing and community engagement, fundraising, strategic planning, and policy development. Most recently, Kessa served as the Director of Government and Public Affairs with T-Bain, is that okay? T-Bain & Co., and is a consultant and member owner of Colluminate, thank you. Should have checked on that one. A cooperative of development consultants. Kessa is a graduate of the University of Louisville and has a Master's of Urban Planning from the University of Michigan. So let's please give them a welcome, and I'm excited for this.
Can you guys hear me? Okay. So our panelists have presentations, so we'll start there, and then we'll get into a good dialogue.
If you go to the next slide, we'll figure out who's first.
Who's first?
That's not me.
That's me.
All right.
Okay.
That is me. Can you all hear me in the back? I've never been accused of not being able to be heard. So, all right. So again, I'm Marilyn Harris. I'm the director of the Office of Housing and Community Development for Louisville Metro Government, and we have just recently released, and this is exciting news, our strategy to develop 15,000 units of affordable housing before 2027. I will tell you, thank you. I will tell you that is a lofty goal, right? So let me back up just a little. In 2018, we commissioned the housing needs assessment for the city of Louisville, and it stated that we need like 78,000 units for households at or below 100% of area median income. And if you drill all the way down, that takes us to about 31,412 for households at or below 30% of area median income. That is an extremely hard population to serve. So when we start talking about what that population can pay, we're around $450 a month for rent plus utilities. That is really a difficult pail of water to carry. That's an extremely low threshold. So when the mayor, and I believe he's joining us later, ran, he committed to trying to create or preserve 15,000 units of affordable housing. And so since he's taken office, we have been working on a housing strategy, and that strategy was released at the beginning of this month. And that strategy really has this vision to create a stronger, more vibrant Louisville. So it is based on the CHASE principles, and so that's connected, healthy, authentic, sustainable. That has been in the 2040 plan since it was launched, and so sustainable is one of those, but it also includes equitable, and this mayor has included safe. So it's CHASES, not CHASE anymore. Just in case anybody wants to know that, it's CHASES. And so oops, I think I've messed up my pages here. So the 5 strategies, the plan is divided into 5 strategies, and each of those strategies have implementation items that, actions that we are going to take. And so the first one is to provide incentives to create and preserve affordable units. And I want to talk just a second about what HUD calls an affordable unit. And I want to make sure everybody understands that this strategy that the mayor is releasing is affordable housing. And so that means anybody, and I don't care if your income is $200,000 a year or $20,000 a year. It is this mayor's goal to make sure that everyone in this city has an affordable place to live. Now, mind you, if you make $200,000, it's a lot easier to find some place to live, right? That's like $6,000, a month. I went to public school. I'm not great at math, but that's a lot of money to spend on your housing costs. But conversely, if you make $20,000 a year, that doesn't leave you a lot to find housing options, right? It's very hard to find housing options on that amount of money. So it is this mayor's goal to make sure that everyone in the city of Louisville has an affordable place to live. And so, my slide is not advancing. I don't have a clicker. One more. All right, there we go. Sorry. I will say slide advance so you guys know when. Okay, sorry. They didn't tell me that earlier. I just thought they would magically know. So we're going to create and preserve 15,000 units of affordable housing, and that is absolutely 100% our goal before the end of 2026. And so to do that, we're going to provide incentives and to preserve and create units. We're going to create long-term affordable homeownership opportunities. We're going to preserve the units we have, because it doesn't do us any good to create new units if we're losing on the back end, right? So we've got to make sure that we are being proactive to preserve these. We're going to generate new capital sources, and that's funny. How are we going to generate? What we're really going to do is we're going to look for sources that we haven't tapped into before. And then we're going to assist our low and moderate income households with access to capital so they can do things like solar for all, solar over Louisville. They can become a part of sustainable options in their home. And so those are really critical parts of this plan. Okay, next slide. This housing strategy also aligns with climate and environmental justice goals that we have within the city of Louisville. So we're going to leverage new and innovative tools to implement sustainable building technologies. We are looking at things like our EPAD or the Inflation Reduction Act or Solar over Louisville and Solar for All, trying to make sure that we can tap into those things to make units more affordable. I have for a long time been a houser. That's what I do. I've been doing it since '94, and I have said for years and years, I can get anybody into a house. I can make their monthly mortgage payment affordable to them. What I cannot control is energy costs. And so we have got to be more proactive, and we've got to figure out how to control those energy costs so that we really, really make the unit affordable. I have a fella that I worked with years and years ago when I first started, and this is why I believe what I believe. His name was Mr. Washington, lived in Shelbyville, Kentucky. He was on about $700 a month of Social Security. I cobbled together enough pieces of money from different sources, and I got Mr. Washington into a 2-bedroom shotgun house for about $200 a month in mortgage costs, right? That seems like it would be affordable. This was in 1993. And then we had the great snowfall and the deep freeze that came in early that year, right? And Mr. Washington's utility bill for 1 month was $685. That was his entire paycheck. And so literally at that point in my career, I said, we've got to control energy costs because it doesn't do me any good to get Mr. Washington into his house if Mr. Washington can't stay in his house. And so that's really what we are looking at trying to do with all of the residents of the city of Louisville. Not just our low income. They are, of course, a priority because our HUD dollars focus on low income. But we want all residents of the city of Louisville to have a sustainable unit. Okay, next slide. I have lots of notes up here, I'm sorry. Wait, still more notes. All right, so strategy number 1, is that right? Yep. Strategy number 1 is to provide incentives. And so one of the things that we are going to do to provide incentives is we are going to start fast-tracking applications that include a % of affordable housing units, but also that have the presence of sustainable building technologies in the plan. So not only they have to be affordable housing units, we have to have, the developer has to have built in sustainable building technologies. And then we're going to incentivize modular construction, and this excites me like nothing else. How long have we been building houses? Hundreds of years, right? And for hundreds of years, we've been taking a hammer and a nail, and we've been going to a piece of wood, and we've been banging it together and building a house. Well, modular housing is a different way of building, and so it could be panelized, it could be SIPS panels, it could be a 3D printed house. There's a lot of different types of modular housing out there. Modular housing is much more sustainable, much more energy efficient, and we want to facilitate a green workforce so that they can actually work on these. We are working to bring a modular housing developer into the community to actually produce manufactured housing here. And so we want to set clear eligibility criteria through these incentives so that developers understand what qualifies and a certain percentage of these units, but we also want to make sure that we get our workforce trained so that they can have a job in the modular industry. We are never going to meet 15,000 units if we don't look at a different way of building, right? We'll never, time just doesn't allow. Next slide. We want to generate new revenue for affordable housing development, so we're going to establish a green bank. And so we will look at utility-based incentives and grants for environmentally sustainable technologies, including the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund to develop local and national green banks. We're going to use that right here in Louisville. We're working with Sumaita's office. Sumaita's right up here up front, making sure I don't say anything wrong. She's there. She's my support. But really, we are relying on that office to really be a strong part of this plan. We're going to mobilize our private capital towards environmentally sustainable technologies by de-risking incentives, right? We want to take the risk out of some of these incentives. We're going to provide gap financing to allow developers to build zero energy ready homes and units that are meet with little to no additional cost. And so if we have to provide subsidies to developers to do that, we are prepared to do that. It's that important that we get these into our community. And we're going to integrate sustainable technology offerings into existing programs such as development incentives, housing subsidies, home improvement loans, mortgage payments, and develop new incentives and financial products to help get energy, sustainable energy methods into our home, into our city. So the strategy has been released, and we are now in a public comment period. Oh, new slide, sorry. New slide. We are now in a public comment period, and this is where you guys all come into play, right? We want your public comments. We want to know what we can do, what we can include in this strategy that will help. So you can go to louisvilleky.gov/government housing my Louisville home. It's just Google my Louisville home. It just comes right up. Don't worry about that big long link. We want your comments. Please tell us what we can do to make the plan more sustainable for our community. We will take those comments through November 3rd, and then we will release a final plan on December 1st. And that's it for me.
Thank you. So our friend from Cincy is up.
Yeah, let's see the next slide. It is. So again, my name is Ben Eilerman, and I am with Over the Rhine Community Housing. Next slide. So we are a nonprofit organization that has been working in the Over the Rhine neighborhood of Cincinnati for over 40 years. The Over the Rhine neighborhood is one that saw a lot of disinvestment, and it saw a lot of predatory landlords and folks come into the neighborhood who were really taking advantage of the low-income residents there. So our organization was formed to help develop, manage resident-centered affordable housing, but then also to develop inclusive community that really benefited low-income residents. Next slide, please. And so who do we serve? We serve the residents of Over the Rhine and the larger Cincinnati area. So on average, our residents make about 40% of the area median income. So those that are really the hardest to house, hardest to serve. And so our residents, are working, right? We take great offense to the term workforce housing to be exclusive to folks making more than 80% of area median income, as it's often defined. Our residents are working in the jobs that were elevated during the COVID pandemic, those essential workers in nursing homes, in grocery stores, teachers, firefighters, police officers. Next slide, please. We also serve our community's most vulnerable. So our housing includes permanent supportive housing. So housing for folks who have been on the street, housing for folks who have current addictions, are in recovery. And so it involves housing those folks both in projects that look to specifically address their needs, but it also involves having on-staff social workers and a resident services staff that works integrated with our property management staff to ensure that all residents have access to those needs that they might need. Next slide. And so we do this by focusing on a couple key areas. Property development, the department that I lead, property management, resident services, and again, that crossover between property management and resident services is really at the heart of our mission. and then through education and advocacy, not only of our residents, but throughout the city at large. And next slide. And so we do this by developing, to date, we've developed over 700 units. Of those, about 500 that we currently manage. We are at that intersection of historic buildings that we heard about. The Over the Rhine district is one of the largest collection of Italianate buildings in the country. So we've got about 100 buildings that kind of fit into that portfolio, but then also looking to bring on new buildings wherever we can. So this building behind us, our Perseverance project on Vine Street, is a combination of 3 historic buildings and then the construction of 1 new building. And so those new buildings that we have allow us to do several things. They allow us to bring on bigger, larger units that oftentimes don't fit into the building stock that we have. They allow us to bring in more accessibility. Right? The walk-up structures, these 3 or 4 story walk-up structures, don't allow a lot of opportunities for accessibility. And then they also allow us to really reach deeper into our sustainability goals. And next slide. And so that's it.
Pass at the clicker. Oh. Somebody didn't turn their slides in on time. Okay. So hi, I'm Tiffany Burrows-Yost. I'm the Director of Sustainability and Resilience at GBBN, and we're an architecture firm. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the strategies to meet all the goals that Marilyn and Ben have mentioned. All right, so I gave it away here. All right, so we do design housing, we design healthcare, we are highly focused on the arts. We have a large portfolio of projects. We've signed on to the AA 2030 commitments. We're trying very hard to design all of our buildings to be net zero by 2030. And so I think housing for us is a really critical component because it's, as we saw this morning, you know, one of the ways that you can really start to address climate change. And I think for us, good design is sustainable design. It's not enough just to put a roof over people's heads and walk away. That needs to be high quality, sustainable, healthy housing that they can afford to stay in. It can't just be the cheapest possible thing you can build for the least amount of money. Next slide. Okay. So I think what we've found in our work is that creating multiple passive house standard and often prefabricated housing typologies really can help improve the resilience of a neighborhood and can reduce that energy burden that we've heard Jennifer talk about and the other panelists talk about by up to like 70%, which is huge. And that we can do this in an economically viable way. Oh, okay. So what are the benefits of doing this? Well, there's a host of environmental benefits, there are financial benefits, and there are social and physical well-being benefits. So for us, we're highly focused on creating spaces for people. Oh, thanks, Reen. Just keep advancing the slides if I fall off the stage. Okay, so sustainable materials. Again, this is about making the space good quality. Just because it's affordable shouldn't mean that it's less. So we can still have thermal comfort, we can make it comfortable, we can have good sound attenuation, we can do all those things, and it can be resilient so that people can live there throughout the year in these worse weather events that we're seeing. We know that it takes time to build generational wealth, so it's important to have a place to live where you can save money, where you can really build that community and pass that down. And we also know that we can do all these things often with, in looking at prefab, we can reduce the site impacts, we can improve quality because it's being built someplace else. So there's a lot of potential advantages. Next. So how do we do this? We start by engaging the community. That's something that we don't always get to do on all of our projects, but it's something that we find incredibly valuable and that we advocate for. You want to not just go into, although sometimes you don't get a choice, you don't want to just go into a neighborhood and be like, here's the solution. You really want to find out what's going on. You want to get to know the community. So we focus on that. In this example here from a project in Pittsburgh, a lot of the artwork that will be going up in the space was helped, we developed along with the community. Next. We try to start with passive house design. Jennifer talked about this a little bit. This is a great way to reduce energy burden. Passive house projects are typically 70% less, use 70% less energy use. So how do you do it? It's not quite as simple as the 5 strategies, but this is where we start. High performance windows, continuous insulation, airtight, thermal bridge free. For all the architects, you know what I'm talking about. Energy recovery ventilation. We can talk more about that later. Okay. And electrify. Jennifer also mentioned this. That's not just about getting rid of you definitely want to get rid of combustion in your building, but there's a big air quality improvement. And it's also cheaper to heat food and make food on your induction oven than on your gas stove where all the heat's just going into your room. So there's a health and carbon aspect to these things that I think we want to focus on and that are not always talked about. So we are also considering modular fabrication. This is it being built at the manufacturer, so there's really good quality control, shipped to the site, and then put together. There's aspects that come together on site. This big deck here, for example, was built on site once the units were assembled. We're also really looking at incentives. GBBN, we've developed a calculator for the Inflation Reduction Act because we want to know how much money is available to our clients. We want to help them set the right targets, and we want to add to their capital stack. So we have developed this calculator. This is some numbers we came up with for one project. It's looking at millions of dollars. That's a very specific one, all affordable, union labor. Ticks all the boxes. But there's real money there, so we want to make sure that we find it. We will be eventually releasing this calculator to the public, but for now, if you want to see it, you have to get in touch with me. Okay, so what does that mean? It means apply these strategies to existing buildings, because we can't do this without our existing building stock. Do it in multiple ways. Multifamily, these are some projects in Cincinnati. Next, please. Again, similar to the one Ben showed, existing building with new construction. Next. Next. Make them comfortable, nice, airy, easy on the inside. Next, please. More multifamily. This is the project in Pittsburgh. Keep going. This is a senior housing project. Again, just make them nice. It's simple. It's not so difficult. It's affordable. Keep going, please. Another one that's looking to get a lot of incentives. Next. But do multiple kinds. This is some single-family proposal that we're looking at. Next. This is the one's a little dark, but they're having the best time of their life in their backyard. Next. And then townhouses. So we're really trying to look at not just a single type of housing, because we need, what was it, 78,000 units of housing? It's got to be in all the forms. Next. I think that's the last one. That's it. So now we can all talk about this.
Thank you, panelists, for sharing your perspective. Tiffany has asked me to participate in this event a couple of years, and so I'm glad I said yes today. I wasn't feeling the best. But then when I was listening to you guys talk, I was like, this is interesting. I'm a planner, she's an architect, we've got a developer, nonprofit manager, and a city bureaucrat, I'm just what I call her. So I think we should have a pretty good dialogue. I believe, and I think that you guys too believe, that sustainable, affordable housing is possible in all places. As a planner and as a first-time homeowner, I would say, and I've got friends who are wanting to buy a house and looking to get into a new apartment. And the biggest problems I hear for our market here in Louisville is that there's not enough and it's too expensive. So think about our guest presentation, and she had that slide where she talked about the CRID and the older buildings. I forget what the second thing was. But in a brief description, how would you describe Louisville's housing market and then Cincinnati for you guys, or just in general, like what are we dealing with right now?
So can you hear me? Sorry. I will start by saying pre-pandemic, the average rent in Louisville was $770, and that's across all bedroom types, everything. We are now looking at close to $1,250. That's an amazing, I've been doing this a long time, and that is an amazing increase in a very short period of time. And so that is just the rent cost. That is not the energy cost. That is not the, your utilities. That's not, if you're looking at buying, that's not your insurance. I sat in on a presentation the other day that insurance is skyrocketing. And so, we are truly lacking in affordable housing, whether it be single-family home ownership, whether it be multifamily. As we start thinking about how we're going to develop housing in Louisville and what it's going to look like, one of the things that we're doing is really taking a deep dive in the land development code to get more housing of all different types. So not just single family, not just multifamily, but duplexes, triplexes. We have an entire missing segment of housing types in the city of Louisville. As many of you know, ADUs are now by right. You can do an ADU in an accessory dwelling unit in the city of Louisville. So that means that if you have a piece of land, I live in a snub division, and so we've got a fairly decent sized piece of land. And if I wanted to put an accessory dwelling unit on our property, it's by right. I can come to the city. We now have plans that are available. So I can pick from a book of plans, and I can just build that on my property. I don't need any special zoning. I don't need anything. It's by right in the city. That was passed, I think, 3 years ago, 2 years ago, a couple years ago. Yes, ma'am. 2 years ago. Rachel's back there saving me because I am not a planner. I don't work in the planning department, though we have experts that do that. But that is huge. So allowing accessory dwelling units is huge. And so by getting different types of housing in our community, it will then increase affordability.
Ben, what's it looking like in Cincinnati?
So Cincinnati, I think, mirrors Louisville in a lot of ways. I think that, our city, Cincinnati, Louisville, places like St. Louis, a lot of these kind of Midwestern cities are, I think, having their eyes opened to how much of a need for housing there is. And in a very similar way, the need for housing is most acute for those making the least. And so while it's encouraging that affordable housing is now a buzzword, it's also discouraging that it's taken this long for us to get here. So the need is tremendous. I'm encouraged by the conversations that we're having. But I just want everyone to realize that there is no easy solution to it. It's going to take hard, long work to solve it.
Tiffany, as an architect.
Well, I think I would say first, I lived in New York City for 20 years before moving to Louisville, and rents were high. But that comes with all the amenities of that density. And when I moved here, it was some effort to find, I wanted to walk to a coffee shop, a library,
you lost your mic? Just speak up a little bit.
So, so I think we need to provide that good, high-quality, sustainable housing, but we also need to do it in a way that creates good neighborhoods and not drop off a house in the middle of nowhere where you got to drive to it.
So most folks are from Louisville or live in Louisville, so we know our city a little bit. So I'm gonna share a little bit of my housing story. When I was ready to leave a partner, I was living in Shelby Park and Smoketown are same neighborhoods to me, but we can talk about that later over drinks. And I started looking in my neighborhood to rent a house. I couldn't afford it. I didn't have a voucher for Section 8, and most of the houses that were available were for that. And if they weren't, they were too expensive for me to afford, $1,200, $1,400. So I was lucky enough to find a woman that was leaving the city, and she was a first-time homeowner, wanted to rent a house. I rented her house in South Louisville. And as soon as the housing moratorium was over, literally this next day, I got a letter from an attorney saying that she wanted me out in 30 days. I took 45. And so for 6 months, my family and I were houseless. My teenagers and I were houseless. And I'd always wanted to be a homeowner. I served on River City Housing's board and closed on several houses for other people, 15 years ago when my baby was a baby. And here I was without a house. I've got to make it happen. I've got to figure out how to do it. And lucky enough, there were a few things that worked for me. The pandemic meant that I didn't make a lot of money. So I was eligible for some down payment assistance from the city, which made it really affordable for me to get the house, to shop in the budget that I wanted to. But then I had a problem that I couldn't afford to live in Russell. I couldn't afford to buy a house in Shawnee. Either they were too expensive or they were crappy. And the down payment money that I saved was not enough to invest in the house. Lucky enough, I found a house in Beachmont, which is really where I wanted to live, but God is good, I believe in, yeah. So I was able to get the house in Beachmont at the top of my budget with the down payment assistance, actually more than I expected from the city. And that happened because of policy. Happened because some folks in DC did some stuff. It happened because people in our city demanded that we invest money into housing, a lot of different housing, so people could get it. And those are policy decisions that we made, right? So I'm gonna get back to policy because I know that, I'm gonna get back to policy in a second. But the neighborhoods that I spoke about, Smoketown and Shelby Park, are rapidly gentrifying. Russell, I couldn't afford a house in Russell. I mean, some of the stock was just not good. Sorry, it's not my turn to talk. But back to Cincinnati. So one of my favorite bars in Cincinnati is called Somerset. It's in, you tell me where it is in Cincinnati. It's close to Over the Rhine.
Yeah, that's right.
So it's this awesome bar, beautiful bar. And I'm assuming there's some affordable housing on that block because folks were hanging out and they were having a good time. And it was like intergenerational kind of, atmosphere. And it was like, this is the kind of neighborhood I want to live in, where we got this really nice bar where I probably paid $15 for a cocktail, but folks are hanging out in the street, like hanging out. And it felt like a gentrifying neighborhood, but it also felt like not what I've heard people talk about over the Rhine. I've visited back and forth. But there's this complexity, right, with increasing housing values in places where the housing values have really shrunk and keep it affordable so people can live in it. So from your perspective, how does that work? How do you have Somerset on that block and people hanging out across the street?
You want me to talk about gentrification over the Rhine? All right, well, you
all
all can go sit down. And so it's hard, right? I think it's incredibly difficult. Folks have called Over the Rhine home for decades, for generations, right? And there has been a community in that neighborhood well before our organization was there 40 years ago. But if you listen to the narrative, about what has happened in Over the Rhine. It involves a place that didn't exist, right? A place that had been completely neglected, disinvested in, and then major corporations came together to rescue it in the 2000s, completely ignoring the folks who had been there. You know, folks wiser than me who started our organization realized and saw that coming and kind of put our foot down and said that, you know, we had to have a place at the table. As a nonprofit, we were able to do what we could do, but what happened is the neighborhood has turned, right? What was once a predominantly low-income, predominantly African-American community is no longer as of the last census, right? So that is just been such a change. And so now all of a sudden, right, affordable housing is the hot topic again, right? So now it's cool to do affordable housing in Over the Rhine. That's great. We like to see that. But what I would like to bring up is that story of Over the Rhine is a story that is happening in neighborhoods throughout our city.
All over the country.
Right? And that the way that you have to get ahead of this, right? Just like your experience, right? I'm not familiar with these neighborhoods, but I think oftentimes people feel like the neighborhoods that are disinvested in, that what I hear when I go to other communities in Cincinnati is, we don't want more low-income housing, right? What we need is we need more market rate housing. And by the time that market rate housing takes hold in those neighborhoods, it's too late, right? Like nonprofit developers like myself can no longer afford to pay those land rates, right? We can't afford to buy that land, build housing, and maintain it as affordable without tremendous subsidy. And so one thing that has been helpful, that has been encouraging as we go to those neighborhoods, is to start to talk about who those folks are that are going to be living in those neighborhoods and start to demystify affordable housing, right? Low-income housing, and really start to talk about who your neighbor is and who you want to live there, and that can really break down a lot of barriers.
Tiffany, is there a different language we should be using right now when we talk about affordable housing or workforce housing? Or?
Well, I mean, it would be great if we could just talk about housing, right? Like if it was just housing, we design and build housing at a range of prices and everybody gets a shot. That's not the way it is. And I think as architects, we often come in towards the end of the process, frankly. I mean, we work hard to engage with communities where we can. That's not always within our scope of work. So I think outside of the specific projects that we're hired to design, we try to get involved in the communities in which we work. We try to actually we try to be a firm that has people with lots of different experiences from a lot of different places, so that we're not constantly trying to learn everything. It'd be nice if we had, people who already knew some stuff because they came from here and there and what there. That's another conversation about the architecture industry and who it attracts and why. But we're working on that from an equity perspective. But I think it goes back again to what we expect. What is the expectation of architecture? It shouldn't be just for the rich. I never hired an architect in my life. Architects built like office buildings and stuff. So how do we design things in a way that it's good quality, but still good. And so I think there are some potential opportunities in prefabricated that doesn't get you to, like, you know, the Walmart of housing. So we still want good design. We still want somebody to have thought about it. We still want people to expect great things from their buildings, but we just have to be smarter about how we do it so that it's easy to be constructed, it's easy to manufacture, and it can come together quickly.
So several years ago in Western Kentucky, there were, in Warren County, they partnered with their utility, it's Tennessee Valley Authority, and they were building net zero schools. And I think at least 2 of them were to the point where the utility was paying the schools. Well, then the utility cut the program. So I think Warren County is still building net zero schools, but they don't come in with that they're not grandfathered in with that arrangement with the utility. Here in Louisville, every time I'm in a conversation about what we can do, there's always this conversation of, well, LG&E is not going to do it. We can't do that. And I'm so sick of hearing that. We had a question from the audience earlier who asked Jennifer, our guest, about what they were doing with their utilities. And basically what I heard from her is that they're going to do what they're going to do, and we're going to still have our plans, and we're going to build to our plans. And so I would love to see, a dream policy, there's tons of them that I can make up, but one dream policy would be that any housing that Metro invests in is all net zero. And it's all sustainable. And that if it's affordable, if there are public subsidies going to particularly apartments, they should all be affordable. What are y'all's dreams policies? Let's dream up here.
Well, before I tell you my dream policy, I want to say this. By show of hands, how many people own a home? Okay, keep your hands up. How many people have ever claimed a mortgage interest deduction on your taxes? Keep your hands up if you have. Okay, all of you people that have your hands up, you live in subsidized housing, and don't kid yourself that you don't. You just get your subsidy on the back end. Developers who are building affordable housing are getting it on the front end. No difference. I'll just let you know that prior to 2017, when the tax laws changed, $75 billion, that's with a B, was given in mortgage interest deductions annually. $75 billion. I only need $5 billion to build my houses in Louisville. Just give me $5 billion and we can build all the housing we need in the city of Louisville, okay? $75 billion is an astronomical number. Right now, it's about $25 billion since the tax laws changed. It's about $25 billion, and that $25 billion is claimed 94%, I just made that number up, but it sounds good. It is claimed largely by people who are over $200,000 in income. And those are the same people who are fighting at our planning commission and our city council that they don't want housing, multifamily housing in their backyard. And I think we need to understand that those are the people that are getting subsidy on the back end, as opposed to our less fortunate community members getting subsidy on the front end.
So we can't change, we might not be able to change what happens in DC, so we can just ask them to give that back locally.
We cannot.
As a policy.
But locally, what we can do is we can continue to only invest in products that are sustainable, that are affordable for our citizens. And so that is part of what we do. If we are providing any incentives from the city, then that unit has to be affordable and sustainable. And so that is part of our policy, and we will continue to do that.
I think we've only got a few more minutes, so if you guys could speed up your policy dream, because I have one more question.
I logged it, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Well, as a real estate developer, I cannot advocate for any new policies, less policy. But what I would say is I think that there is tremendous opportunity in the land development code, as you spoke about. Right now, as most zoning codes are written throughout the country, almost all projects require some kind of outside approval, variances, plan developments. And if we can build housing by right, I think that is going to really just make this hard work just a little easier.
I would say the thing that would most affect housing in all of our buildings would be to jump to the current energy code. We're on an energy code from a long time ago. And how many architects are in this room? Raise your hand. All right, so there's a few of you. We can advocate for that. And if the state won't do it, then New York City has its own energy code. We do our own energy code, and we build it from Louisville out.
I don't know that we're taking questions. I don't think we have time, so apologize for that. The last question is, how do we get this space to be more inclusive? I just came from a conversation with other food advocates, and we were looking at maps of our city, mapping different food assets, and really not trying to look at deficits, but what are the opportunities? And the opportunities were in the western part of our city, where most of people of color in our city live. In other places. And here we are talking about sustainability and housing, and the space is white, as has been for some time. So how do we make this space, or conversations about housing, not like around workforce housing or affordable housing, but how do we make this conversation more inclusive so that we can really get to the work? Y'all got 30 seconds.
Go ahead, Ben.
We have to be intentional, right? We have to stop kind of falling back to what we know, because it'll end up with rooms like this.
Thank you.
You know, I agree. It's intentionality. We looked, you're a product of our DPA program, but a few years ago, we took a hard look at our down payment and closing cost program, and we noted that literally 92%, that's a real number, 92% were west of I-65. Of all of the DPA assistance that we had provided, they were houses west of I-65. And so we were real intentional about doing two things. First of all, increasing the amount of subsidy provided, and secondly, increasing the cost of the house that could be purchased. So up until about 2 years ago, it was about $165,000. Now it's $250,000. So we really raised that because what we are trying to do is get housing, affordable housing, into every pocket of our community, whether you're in Prospect or Pleasure Ridge Park, it doesn't matter, or Portland, anywhere in between, we want it everywhere. So we are trying to be very intentional about what we can do to make those investments in multiple places.
So as our architects and as our firm, we are really, we have undergone a kind of awakening within the firm. Architecture is traditionally male, it's traditionally white. We've invested in racial equity training across the firm, which has been significant. But I think the other thing that I think we're really actively trying to do is not just look for diversity in the firm and say, oh, that's hard because there's only so many black architects. They can't all come work for us. But also look for skills. We are looking to hire people who can see things with a racial equity lens. And that, I can do that right now, today. I can learn and do that. So we are actively seeking people with that skill and training our staff to have that skill. And that we can do a lot faster than we can convince. In the state of Kentucky, there's a handful of licensed architects who are not white.
Well, thank you, everyone. Let's give them a round of applause. Yeah, that was an awesome panel. Thank you very much. We are about to take a break. It is going to be a little bit longer. We know the first one was shorter. You have about 20-25 minutes to go look at the exhibitors, talk to the panelists, talk to Jennifer, grab a snack, a drink, whatever. So thank you very much. Okay, we have some great lightning talks that are going to be even more thought-provoking and want you guys to have more conversations with each other, which is fantastic. But we need to hear them first. So we're going to get to that now. We're going to hear 4 lightning talks, and they're here to get you excited about sustainability, have you learn about new things, and like I said, make connections. So first, we have Tamara. So Tamara, why don't you come on up? I'm gonna turn your mic on. There you go.
Is it on? Can you hear me? Okay.
Okay. You need to talk louder than you think you need to. That's been my lesson for today. So Tamara Slutz is the Assistant Director, Office of Advanced Planning and Sustainability.
I'm the director of the Sustainability Master's Program at the University of Louisville, and I need to update my bio with the Louisville Sustainability Council.
Oh, I got the wrong bio. My apologies. I'll let her introduce herself.
I think I just did.
Yep.
Okay. I'm here to talk today about the community grant awards from the Louisville Sustainability Council. On our website, sometimes it's called the Sustainability Fund. Sometimes we call it the mini grants or the micro grant program. Is it good there, Lynn? Yeah, okay. So I'm going to announce these awards today. First of all, I do want to thank the committee that, well, first of all, I want to thank the individuals and the organizations that submitted proposals. This time we had over 80 submissions, and the total request was over $360,000 for these 80 proposals. So, of course, we weren't able to award $360,000. We would have very much liked to have done that. We did award a total of $30,000. If you want more information about the awardees, yes, their information is available on the website, because I'm going to blow through this pretty quickly to save time, and there are some paragraphs on the slide. I want to thank Nick for putting the slideshow together for me, and then I also wanted to thank the committee members. David Abel has been chairing the committee for quite some time. I got voluntold, no, actually I volunteered to take over the chair position after he leaves at the end of the year. We also had Sherry Hurley, Ellen Trahan, and Mark Donnelly. So we worked on reviewing these proposals. So let's do the next slide so we can see who was awarded. Okay, so Canopy is partnering with Bernheim to basically create a good business certificate. And I know we have folks from Bernheim. If you want to stand up if you're involved, just wave your hand. Canopy. All right, yes. Okay, and we'll go ahead and go to the next slide too. The Center for Neighborhoods is going to have a GIS learning tool, and they're going to be working with JCPS students. This is a valuable tool and skill set for students, and I think Rob is with Center for Neighborhoods. He'll be speaking later, so good job on that too. Oh, next slide, sorry. The Park Alliance of Louisville is going to create a interactive garden at the Alberta Jones Park in the California neighborhood. I think Brooke is here in the back. Yeah, so good job on that one. Next slide, please. Oh, wait, okay. Second Chances Wildlife Center is going to basically visit schools that are impoverished area that may not have the resources to bring their students to Second Wildlife Chances to interact with rescued animals. So this is them using their funds to go out to schools. Yes. Fern Creek High School is going to be working on decreasing the amount of water they need to irrigate their gardens at their school grounds. Yeah, woo. I think they're probably on school right now. The Sustainable Agriculture of Louisville program is looking at an intercropping program and workshops to increase intercropping in the community. So, yes, I don't know if anybody's there from, okay. Next slide, please. So, LCAN, stand up, Sarah Lynn. Anybody else from LCAN? I think Wallace and others. They are working on their urban energy partnership. They were awarded funds to go out and work with Black and brown communities to increase energy efficiency and energy savings in these homes. All right. So I think we already clapped for you. So, okay. All right, next slide. KRC, the Kentucky Resources Council, received funding to basically have advocacy workshops and develop a pamphlet to organize community members to advocate, especially with issues related to air pollution. So we have folks from KRC tabling in the back. There we go. This is a great one. Kentucky Solar Energy Society. They are starting a clean energy plate fund, much like coal keeps the lights on. But I know. So this will fund solar energy. There's a small amount that is required to start the program. So this is seed funding to start that program. And I think the plan might be to make the license plate black too, because a lot of people just seem to like black license plates. Let's hope they do, yes. Okay, and then the Library Foundation will be working with Ripple Effects. Ripple Effects is a K through 12 photography contest that happens each year. The numbers are growing with the participation. The winners have a booth at the Kentucky State Fair, and the photos are often housed in the public library. I know Becca works with this and some other folks, if they're here today. Okay. Okay, so stay tuned. Our next round of community grants, sustainability fund, mini grants will be opening soon. There will be some slight changes to this submission just to make it easier for folks that are submitting proposals and for the reviewers. So, but please, make sure you already like us on Instagram or Facebook or whatever you use, because we'll send out alerts, and you can always check the website or bug Nick. So, all right.
Great. Thank you, Tamara. Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you. All right. Awesome. I'm excited to see what we can do next year. So Robin is up next. Yeah, sure, because apparently my notes are gone.
Hey everyone, my name is Robin Frederick. I'm a graduate student at the University of Louisville. Sustainability is my focus. Thank you to the LSC for having me, as always, doing God's work. So we got my slide up. Okay, cool. So I'm going to actually talk to you guys today about my experience living tiny for 3 years and the behavior change that came with that, and if those behaviors have in fact stuck with me. So let me start with a couple of questions. How many of you have ever entertained the idea of living tiny, off the grid, or just a more sustainable life? Show of hands. Awesome. That's great. And perhaps an even more thought-provoking question. And don't worry, you guys don't have to answer this one. Just let that marinate as we go along. Okay, so do you believe your current lifestyle would align with the principles of tiny house living? And by that I mean, consider your belongings, right? What would you be willing to part with? Think about your energy and water consumption right now. Think about the amount of storage that you currently need and more. I mean, the list goes on, so just think about that. Now, a bit of information on the tiny house that you see here. It is entirely off-grid. It's equipped with a 100-gallon rainwater harvesting system that we use solely for our water source. In addition, it has 4 solar panels, each one producing 100 watts. All right, so with that background in mind, and with Phil here, that is his given name by me, not by his owners, the goat staring at you, that is, let me share a couple of stories with you. On my very first day in the tiny house, I managed to deplete all of my energy resources within 8 hours. The next night, I ran out of water. So as you can imagine, that is the experience that I had within my first 2 days. For additional information, we had no cell phone service, no Wi-Fi, and worst, we could not Netflix and chill. So what a great way to automatically change my lifestyle, right? So the questions that I asked and the stories that I just told you, if you haven't noticed, they all have a theme, right? Which revolves around behavior. You know, it's one thing to contemplate the idea of living tiny, but the essence of this lifestyle lies in the space in which you inhabit, and also within the shift in perspective and behavior that you had. Now, you know, in general, when it comes to the space you inhabit, you know, you need to embrace these fundamental changes if you're wanting to become or live tiny or change your sustainable lifestyle or mindset, right? So this is an idea that I had to quickly learn during my first few days living in this 200 square foot tiny house. All right, next slide. Now, listen, guys. I am passionate about data. I love gathering data, I love analyzing data, but most importantly, I love presenting on data because it also tells a story, right? So this is my 2018-2019 chart. It illustrates our complete carbon footprint, so that's gonna be encompassing travel, home-related expenses, shopping, and various services like cell phone, streaming. Yes, I kept that, just didn't watch it at home. And also our total footprint, which was 17 tons of CO2 a year, both of me and my partner combined, of course, and it was 67% better than the average household. Next slide. Cool. All right. having transitioned back to the city, living in now a 576 square foot house for this past year, I decided to continue my assessment. So our total annual carbon footprint has obviously increased to 21 tons of carbon, primarily due to our now home-related expenses such as rent. We didn't have that before, energy, and also water. So, it is, however, essential to note here, as you can see, that yeah, our total footprint is still 38% better than the average, and also our emissions are still below comparable households to ours right now. Next slide. Okay. I hope you're enjoying the photos of the tiny house, by the way. I thought that was a nice touch. Okay, so this slide provides an overview of our total energy, gas, and water usage for a year between living spaces. And I'm just going to let you just look at the verses here, but for some context here in terms of energy, the average electricity usage is a little over 15,500 kilowatts a year. That's according to Google, so don't come at me. Also, gas in terms of the average household in Louisville uses roughly 720 cubic feet. That's how they measure natural gas. Also, lastly, within the realm of water, a residential customer household usually uses on average a year 48,000 gallons. So as you can see, we're doing really, really good. However, water is our culprit here because we now have a washing machine and we're not super afraid to flush the toilet, just so you know. Okay, moving on. Okay, so here we are, right? I want to talk to you a little bit about the benefits of tiny house living and the mindfulness it instilled within me and my partner. So our carbon footprint was mainly due to travel, prompting us to consume consciously, and it also reshaped our perspectives. I embraced a capsule wardrobe, and for those of you who don't know what that is, I had about 3 pairs of shoes and 6 clothing articles, and boy, did you guys get tired of seeing me in those. I got tired of wearing them. In terms of mindfulness, I guess you could say, our living situation also prompted vigilance about food waste, as we only had a dorm room-sized refrigerator and no freezer space to work with. So these adjustments reduced our environmental footprint impact and fostered a simpler, more intentional way of life. Next. Okay, great. So let's talk about now the 576. Okay, so you may be asking, Robin, right? Have these mindful lifestyles changes, have they endured with you? Well, in terms of benefits, transitioning to an urban living naturally brings fewer travel distances, right? But we continue to monitor our energy and water usage, as you can tell throughout this presentation. And often, to be honest with you, as we all do, I'm sure, I feel guilt about the amount of resources we consume. But, I also still occasionally catch myself wanting to check on that imaginary 100-gallon water tank every now and then that lived outside in the tiny house. As for our possessions, we remain true to minimalism, although my wardrobe has certainly grown in size. So I would say, yeah, many of these mindfulness practices and lifestyle changes have indeed stuck with us in one way, shape, or another. So in conclusion to this presentation, I would like to encourage you to explore the adoption of lasting habits and currently to critically assess your current trajectory, right? Because, embracing tiny living, it is just a single facet. It is one choice of many that you can make to live more mindfully. The thing is here is the choice is yours. Thank you.
That was pretty inspiring. I have to admit, the idea of a tiny home has always intrigued me, but I'm going to have to really rethink that because I think I just said to my husband last week, why do we not have any more storage space? So, thank you, Robin, for opening my eyes. Next up, we have Rob Monsma. He's the planning director at Center for Neighborhoods, and he's going to tell us about the Better Block program.
All right, can everybody hear me okay? All right, good afternoon. Like she said, my name is Rob Monsma. I'm the planning director at Center for Neighborhoods. And I'd like to speak about some of our recent work to highlight an aspect of sustainability that I think is sometimes overlooked. Many conversations around sustainability focus on the tangible elements of the world we engage in, what we understand as the built and natural environment. And while producing sustainable spaces within these environments is critically important to achieving a livable future, I want to speak to how investing time and resources into the social environment is foundational to that end. And while thinking about this talk and reflecting on some recent work, an old familiar proverb came to mind: give someone a fish and you feed them for a day, teach someone to fish and you feed them for a lifetime. And while I've heard that quote throughout my whole life, it struck me how relevant it is to the pursuit of sustainability, specifically how it speaks to the process more than the outcome. It resonated in particular because of some of the work I've recently been a part of at Center for Neighborhoods. This photograph comes from the end of our Better Block program. We worked alongside residents in the Wilder Park neighborhood over the course of 6 months to assess their community spaces, create a vision for how they could be strengthened, and implement that vision in temporary ways through the use of tactical urbanism. Over the course of a week, residents and staff installed 7 traffic calming designs, 2 soccer fields, facilitated a soccer tournament for neighborhood children, installed a nature trail and self-guided historical walk, built a pop-up beer garden at their community center, provided free food to their neighbors, hosted a vendor fair, hosted engagement events with public officials that included coffee and donuts, and organized a 2-day music festival that highlighted some of the best of Louisville's DIY music scene, all in an effort to demonstrate the vision they created for their built and natural and social environments. And while each of these outcomes individually contribute to a more sustainable quality of life, they are secondary to the organizational bonds that were established through the process. Neighborhood association meetings since then have seen increased attendance. New members have joined and taken on several neighborhood projects themselves. And existing members are engaging institutions, organizations, and agencies throughout Louisville to make the projects they envisioned permanent. For our part, Center for Neighborhoods invested time, money, and resources into the social fabric of a community, and the outcome so far has been the multi-generational coalition of residents that you see in this image who are committed to strengthening their community over the years to come. Looking forward, Center for Neighborhoods will be working alongside JCPS students to design an interactive spatial research tool that facilitates a better understanding of their natural, built, and political environments thanks to a grant from the Louisville Sustainability Council. Our hope is through allowing students to choose what is important to understand and design how they interact with the data, we can create a resource that reflects their interests and strengthens their engagement in these issues. Louisville is fortunate to have so many organizations who place education and engagement at the forefront of their mission, and I want to encourage everybody here to continue investing in the social infrastructure of the communities impacted by our policies, programs, and advocacy, because only through engagement, education, and organizing will we secure a just and sustainable future. Thank you for all of your work, and please feel free to reach out if Center for Neighborhoods can contribute to your efforts.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rob. That's really exciting. And what a great picture, all the smiling faces. So last but not least is Christy Fetch. Christy is the Strategic Healthcare Account Executive for Trane, and she's here to tell us about their thermal energy system.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you all for having me. First, I just wanted to talk a little bit of, people say you work for Trane, why do you care about energy, or why do you classify as an energy expert or sustainability expert? So if you look at the US, the commercial building space is responsible for about 40% of the energy usage in this nation. So of that 40%, Trane can impact up to 75 or 80% of that usage from HVAC equipment, lighting, water heating, and so we care. And we're figuring out how do we work with our commercial buildings and our clients to work towards their sustainability goals, carbon footprint reduction. So we really want to put our money where our mouth is, and we have accepted a challenge of reducing the carbon footprint of our clients by 1 gigaton by 2030. So 1 gigaton, that would be equivalent to the United Kingdom, Italy, and France all being carbon neutral. So this is a pretty big ordeal. So thank you. Thank you. So today I wanted to share a little bit, so we want to do that, and I wanted to share a little bit of insight into one of our own communities that community leaders that we're working with. So if you want to go to the next slide. Okay, you can hit it again. There we go. Okay, so this is an eye chart for everybody, right? I get it. But just look up here at the red circle. So what that is, I'm with you, Robin. I like data. I want to see the data. Okay, so right now, U.S. healthcare is responsible for almost 9% of greenhouse gas emissions in the U.S. 9%. Globally, U.S. healthcare is responsible for 1% of the total greenhouse gas emissions. So if you look at this whole chart is commercial buildings within the U.S., and you can see hospitals are off the charts. But what we can't do with hospitals is say, well, let's turn off the lights, let's turn off the HVAC. These are providing mission critical care to our facilities or to our communities. So the physical environment of care is very important. I like the statistic though. If healthcare worldwide was its own country, it would be one of the top 5 contributors to the largest carbon footprint emissions. So the World Health Organization defines sustainable healthcare as improving, maintaining, and restoring health while minimizing negative impacts on the environment to benefit future generations. So when we think about that, we think about climate change. And climate change is having a direct and an I'm just going to switch it. They're having a direct impact on our vulnerable populations, right? So the people that are the most vulnerable in our society are the ones that are going to suffer the most from climate change. So climate change is also a health crisis. If you can go to the next slide, please. So Norton Healthcare is a close partner of mine that we've worked with for about 15 years. And over the course of the last 6 or 7 years, we've really embarked on what started as an energy reduction goal, now evolving into a carbon footprint reduction. So what you're looking at, again, an eye chart, but what the message is that we have helped together, Train and Norton, offset their emissions as if 2021 never happened. So if they did not output any emissions in 2021, that's how much they have offput by their efforts. So, you know, and in the community, you say, well, how do we know that they're doing that? They've not come out just yet. They're just not quite ready to make the bold statement in front of everyone. So that's why I'm doing it on their behalf. But they are leading our community and they're leading the nation in reducing their carbon footprint. And we know this because they've been recognized nationally by the American Society of Healthcare Engineers. They've received numerous rewards from the Energy to Care program. They also have 3 facilities, 1 hospital and 2 non-acute care facilities that have achieved Energy Star. So I'm sure Energy Star is a common term, but when you're looking at it from a commercial building standpoint, especially a hospital that's so energy intense, you're saying that we are performing in the top quartile of a like building. So you have to think about how do we do that in hospitals if we can't turn off lights, we can't turn off HVAC. We have to get creative. And Norton has taken the stance that they will reduce energy, they will reduce their carbon footprint, but they're also enhancing the environment of care, and they're helping patients before they even walk in the door. And so when we look at that, the Norton West Louisville Hospital that's under construction is one of the first hospitals in the last 150 years in West Louisville. They're really being mindful of making sure that their design and the carbon footprint will not negatively impact the community. So lots of innovations that are going there. It's going to be a state-of-the-art facility, not only from medical care, but from the sustainability side. So one of the innovations that Norton has engaged with us on, if you want to go to the next slide, please, is what's called thermal storage. So if you think about your cell phone, you probably are using it all day long, and then at night you charge it. And then the next day you take it off the charger and you're gone with it all day long. So similar in a commercial building, you can use thermal storage. We make ice all night long. We're charging these ice tanks. You can think of them, they're like big Yeti coolers, right, out in parking lots. And so we charge them all night long with ice. And then during the day, when they need chilled water for their HVAC, we're melting that ice. So we're now reducing energy, we're reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and we're facilitating renewable energy. So it's really, it's a cost-saving measure. It is measure that really helps the outdoor air, right? We're trying to help the health equity. So I just want to recognize Norton for all that they're doing and appreciate you all having us here today.
That's fantastic. What an awesome project. Thanks, Christy. Okay. I don't know about you, but I'm inspired by each and every one of them. There's nuggets, to take from all of that. So thank you again to all four of you to provide your perspective and unique experiences. So before we get into our next panel, we have a message from the mayor to talk to us really about what he wants to see happen in Louisville with regards to sustainability. So we'll let that play, and then our panelists can make their way up and we'll get the ball rolling on our final panel. Thanks. Well, that is a perfect segue for our next panel. So I'll have everybody come up. I got a little water on there, sorry. Thank you. So this panel is our Global Crisis Local Response panel. As the number of dangerous heat days, periods of drought, risk of flooding, and wildfires increase throughout the state, the city leaders grapple with how to improve community resilience and community resilience and quality of life. Our moderator and panelists are from key community institutions, government, academia, and planning and land management. And they'll be talking about Louisville's specific climate risks and key strategies for addressing these issues and how to improve the livability of Louisville. I will keep our bios short to have more time for you guys to talk. So we have Samita Rao, the Executive Director of the Mayor's Office of Sustainability. Samita, if you want to raise your hand. We have Brooke Pardue, the President and CEO of Parks Alliance of Louisville. And Patrick Payuma, the Director of did I get that right? Excellent. The Director of Urban Design Studio, University of Louisville, Christina Lee Brown Envirom Institute. Yes, excellent. And our moderator is Allison Smith, Project Manager for NREL. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to say NREL or NREL. Okay, NREL. This is why I'm not from Louisville, right? So, okay. Anyway, so these are, trust me to say that these are experienced, intelligent people, and their bios would tell you as such. So just let's sit back and let's get into the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Rena. I appreciate that. And I'm thrilled to be here in Louisville to moderate this panel with people that I have worked with and to see so many faces that I haven't seen in a long time. So I am Allison Smith. I'm with the National Renewable Energy Lab. I work remotely from Louisville, but NREL actually provides technical assistance to communities who are looking to address the global climate crisis. That is what we specialize in. In addition to all of the research on energy efficiency in buildings and EV and solar, we're trying to help cities address these things locally. Have the pleasure of working with Sameda here in Louisville, the City of Frankfurt, and New Orleans. I think this is a fascinating way to approach this subject, mainly because over the last few years, we've seen an increase in prioritization of three things. addressing climate change, housing, and public health after the COVID crisis. And I think that everyone in this room probably can connect the dots between those three. But I'm interested to hear from the panel, where are those connections for you, and how does your work help to address kind of that trio, that trifecta of huge societal issues? Patrick, do you want to go first?
I guess I started running the Urban Design Studio back in 2007 and started a series called the Sustainable City Series. We had about 250 people would show up for about 22 events, and it really got me thinking about different things to make a community sustainable, from food. And but really drilling down onto what I do is looking at the built environment and how we can make it work better for people. And now that I'm part of the Envirome Institute at the University of Louisville, we look at it from a viewpoint of everything's like from health. So how does the design and function of a city improve people's health? So it could be walkability, it's trees, it's all different things, but looking at it first from that lens of health, and then trying to figure out what the issues are and how we can solve them.
Kentucky's a tough regulatory environment to address that. Samantha, how has the city worked its way through some of those challenges to still be able to address those issues?
Sure, yeah. So, firstly, just everything is so interconnected, and we're finding that in our work. With residential buildings being the highest source of emissions in the city, that becomes a really important environmental priority. And then we just heard about all the housing crisis that we're facing simultaneously. And then the impact that buildings have on human health, just because we all spend most of our time inside buildings. And also all the energy that's powering buildings is basically creating massive health disparities in the city. Because we're so fossil fuel dependent. So very interconnected, and it was super fun to hear about how New York City and state work together. Unfortunately, the reality is a little bit different here. We do our best, we try, we have positive relationships with the people, our state counterparts, but things don't move as quickly. So some things that we're doing, I think, are still finding, trying to keep that dialogue and communication going to see where there may be overlap, and how we can work together on various different things. But then also trying to be creative about figuring out what we can do that's not dependent on state policy. Because like as Casa was saying earlier, we don't want to keep using the same excuses over and over. At the end of the day, we're going to have to meet our goals, and we're going to figure out how to do it one way or another.
And I think Louisville has done a great job of recognizing that while renewable energy is very sexy, energy efficiency is the base of that pyramid. And I think tackling that through a lot of the programs has made a huge difference. Brooke, what about your work?
Well, I would say, obviously, I'm coming at it through the lens of green space, adding green space, but also recognizing that all of these things are interconnected, and the power that quality green space has on the health of our community. You talked about the fact that most people spend their times in buildings, but if they had access to quality outdoor space, then not only can we design those spaces so that they can be mitigating climate change and creating a more resilient city, but also just spending time outdoors has such a positive impact on our physical, mental, emotional health. So
absolutely. And I think the COVID pandemic highlighted that,
Absolutely.
As well as the inequities in the distribution of those green spaces. And you've done a great job in addressing that here locally. If we're going to talk about the local effects of climate change, Sameda, can you give us just you're preaching to the choir, but what are the main impacts that Louisville will see over the next, let's say, 50 years from climate change that we really have to start thinking about and addressing now?
Sure, yeah. So we were having this conversation earlier, and you know, a lot of times we've done various studies to figure out where our highest climate vulnerabilities are, and urban heat is something that we talk about. I'm sure a lot of you have heard us talk about how Louisville is the fastest warming urban heat island, according to a study that was done several years ago. But we also have increasing risk of flooding and storms and various other like natural, you know, weather-related extreme disasters that are on our radar that we're trying to build resilience against. But then there's also the indirect impacts, right, of all of climate change. Like, for example, we don't think about how supply chains may be disrupted in the future. We saw how COVID did a number on, you know, the electronics products and agricultural products and medicine and just goods getting from, you know, between countries, because we're in such an international ecosystem now with our supply chains and markets and everything being so interdependent. So yes, we are going to face those natural disasters, man-made natural disasters. But at the same time, there's going to be all of these other effects that basically are going to impact every single sector. And I think we need to be thinking about that continuously.
Well, and I would add too, as we look to do the plan for the future, you know, we have 13,500 acres of parkland in Louisville, and how are we utilizing the space that we do have? Like, one of the things that been recently is, typically, if you're going to redesign a park, then you put together the design and then you take it to MSD, and MSD says, yes, that design will do no harm. Why are we not starting with MSD? What are the needs in this community? What can we incorporate as we redo a park to be thinking towards the future and mitigating those climate change, you know, the flooding and those kinds of things. So instead of just, oh, that does no harm, let's utilize the space that we do have to be forward thinking.
There is no magic bullet for climate change, but if there were, it would be trees, because it addresses so many of those issues. How do we think about that in terms of how we design cities? Patrick, from your work, I know you're doing a really interesting project right downtown by Envirome. How do you incorporate these into design that has been based on a certain pattern for many, many decades? How do you change that?
Partly through research. I mean, there's a lot of so the project we're working on right now downtown is called the Traeger Microforest Project. It's at Founders Square, and we're going to try to intensely plant this space to see if we can lower the microclimate temperatures just around it. We know we're not going to change downtown, but if you can measurably see a difference in this area, we can start making an argument for why we should do this in more places. But we're doing that. We're checking for biodiversity, the microbiome. We're also doing clinical studies of having people go out into the park. And as it is, we're doing baseline testing right now, but they go out and see what impact on their stress levels it's had, and how long does that last. And then when we introduce this new planting, does it improve it? And you know, I've had people ask me, why don't you just take like a parking lot or something instead of a place that's already a park? But the thing was that we really feel like we need to be testing ideas, and it's something I've been thinking and pushing a long time now, is we need to be testing and iterating now. We can't wait for, you know, the perfect moment to do something. We can't, I mean, a parking lot would have cost $5 million for the same size space downtown, and it would have taken us 10 years to like get to the point where we're about to, hopefully in this January, February, we'll start doing planting. So speed is of the essence there, and also just thinking about, we need to test to see if it works, and if it doesn't work, we need to pivot. So if we wait for, I mean, trees take a long time to grow, so we need to be speeding this up as fast as possible. So we're looking at that. We're looking at tree wells, ways to create tree communities and things that will be more resilient, as opposed to the one-off trees that don't have any kind of system to rely on with it.
And I think that's fascinating, because it may not cool downtown, but what impact could it have in a neighborhood, right? That is historically detreed and it has no canopy because of redlining and environmental injustice going back decades. And that's a small way that researchers, I think, are starting to incorporate ideas about equity and restoration of justice into research in a way that hasn't been done in a long time. You mentioned a couple of barriers that you found ways around. Brooke, what about your work? What barriers do you face and how do you overcome those?
I think that the thing that we've been doing, particularly through our Parks for All initiative, is just education. You know, I think if people understand exactly what's happening, exactly what it is that we're up against, what the needs are when it comes to our public park system, I think the solutions then come from that. But as long as folks are unaware of what the situation is, then it's, you know, it makes it a lot harder. So, you know, when we talk about, you know, in Louisville, we're investing in our public parks at $40 per cap versus $107. We talk about the fact that we have 31 parks in the system that haven't seen a penny of investment in 20 years, right? Like, you start sharing those stories with people, I always feel like the solutions then come together just by education.
And I think your work shows that it doesn't have to be that way.
Right.
We can do this equitably and make
Yes.
sure that those benefits accrue to other people.
Yeah.
Sumeda, what about you? I'm familiar with many of your challenges, but why don't you share some of that with us? Because I think Louisville has done a great job of overcoming those.
Yeah, so like we talked about, you know, regulatory challenges are one of the big things that we face. We have a state-controlled building code that is on the 2009 Energy Code. There currently is no process to have that reviewed and updated to the latest code. We also have a utility that's investor-owned and controlled at the state level. So again, not too much of a voice other than advocacy in terms of figuring out the supply side of things. So without really a way to mandate a building code or mandate some kind of renewable energy portfolio, we've had to get creative. And I think that it's really cool to hear what cities like New York are doing, because even though the challenges may be different, it's like there's roadmaps that we can kind of look at, proven methodology, whether it's community engagement or specific technologies and costs that we can still kind of borrow. And a lot of what we do is using economic incentives, because that is a tool that we do have. So for example, we have the EPAD program, which is basically more favorable financing options for people that want to invest in energy efficiency, water efficiency, and clean energy in commercial buildings. We also have the Cool Roof Incentive Program, which is a $1 per square foot incentive. It's the most ambitious cool roof program in the country, that we dedicate over half of those funds to our highest heat areas, which are those historically redlined areas. We also have our Solar Over Louisville program that we've talked about a couple of times during this event, which is basically a bulk purchasing program that negotiates wholesale discounts for everyone that wants to participate in the city, so it kind of reduces the cost a little bit, but then also pairing that with that grant program so that people that are facing high energy burden can utilize completely free of cost solar. So those are examples of things that we're doing to try to reduce the cost and use economic incentives for people to make these choices. But we also have a bunch of other stuff going on in the background. We're working with NREL. We won a technical assistance grant last year, and we're working on this full holistic roadmap to how to get our affordable housing stock to the cleanest energy and most energy efficient state possible. And that's looking at 5 different things. It's looking at what are the best technologies, what are the best policies within all of the constraints that we have, how do you find the financing to do this, how do you build a workforce, and how do you start a benchmarking program so we can actually measure this impact and know that it's making a difference. So some of that planning is underway, and that's going to put us in a better position to go after more implementation grants and have data to go after that. So yeah, so there's some work happening in the background.
That's a great segue. One of the questions we wanted to ask about are the incentives that are coming specifically from the federal government. Most of the work that I do providing technical assistance to communities and tribes is helping them prepare to apply for that funding, right? How do you get that strategic plan in place to know what's shovel ready, what can you do, and using the tools that have been developed at NREL that are very data centered that help you make those database decisions. So things like ResStock, which looks at a city's residential housing, looks at the average age, and based on the different housing types, what are the most cost-effective energy upgrades to focus on, right? We could electrify a lot of homes, but in a state where we burn so much coal, that's just gonna increase your electric bill without really seeing a lot of benefits. So what are the other things we can do? And one that we've found for Louisville is insulation and your building envelope. Again, not sexy, right? But we can back up with data that is where people will see the most reduction in their energy burden, and we will have the most impact on the most people. And that's something that Louisville can then incentivize. So, thank you. So for the three of you, there's a lot of funding coming down the pike. That's why I have a job at NREL. What are you looking forward to in these incentive packages, and how do you think it will could change the landscape in Louisville? I'll just throw it out to whoever.
I can start because I'm neck deep in grants, so it's fresh. Yeah. But as an example, a lot of you in this room have been working with us on the Solar for All grant, and I'll use that because there is so much money coming through this Inflation Reduction Act, and we are not the only city in this country that is suddenly dealing with a too much money problem that we never had. And the reason, I mean, it's a good problem to have, obviously. We'd rather have a too much money than the not enough money problem, which we've had for several years. But also just being able to quickly get organized and go after this very competitive money and make sure that we're using it, that we're also thinking about it equitably and doing community engagement while we apply for this has been a learning experience. And as an example with the Solar for All grant, that was a $150 million grant that we went after. That was not just for Louisville, but also for the 54 Appalachian counties in eastern Kentucky, plus the 3 largest urban centers in Kentucky. So we came up with this amazing proposal that was like urban-rural collaboration and drawing in all of these partners in finance and housing and workforce and people that we've never worked with, like the banks in town. And so it was really interesting and it really took everybody just prioritizing this on short notice and coming together and figuring out what do we have, what are our strengths, how do we put something together. And I think that this is something we're just going to have to rinse and repeat over and over again throughout the IRA process, is just figuring out how to make the most of this opportunity, how to make sure we're inviting as many community and technical partners as possible along the way, and doing the best we can with the moment.
While we don't go after those kinds of grants as a nonprofit, what I would say is that, we talk all the time about we're not going to solve any of these problems in a silo. You can't look at, affordable housing and public safety and health equity and environmental equity. We're not going to solve those up and down silos. And I think the thing that I've seen that's so encouraging is exactly what, you just talked about, which is I think we are all coming together in this community throughout the state to realize that, not one agency, not one group is going to solve these problems, and only when we're coming together and taking this holistic approach, not only to, getting grant funding, but just solving problems. It's instead of every man for themselves, every woman for themselves, I think there's a new attitude sort of post-racial justice, through the racial justice issues and through COVID, of coming together as community and solving problems together, because you don't solve big problems up and down silos.
And I think that's reflected in a lot of the grant applications that have been put out by the federal government. Coalition applications are a bear. They're hard enough when you're on your own, but if you're trying to wrangle multiple cities, multiple agencies, public and private partners that all have different priorities, it really is a huge uphill battle. But it highlights the need that you can't work in a silo. And I will say that the federal government is doing this as well. I've never seen EPA and DOT team up together to issue and review grants. That is huge. And so we're starting to see a lot more coalitions from the federal down to the local. And I think recognizing at the federal level that the solutions are local, especially in some of our states where we don't have the state support. Patrick, what kind of funding would you love to see come to Louisville?
I would love to see transportation funding. So that we
Yes.
For both bicycle, mass transit. I mean, if we want to really be a sustainable community, we have to have a really great bicycle and transit network. And we, not pointing fingers, but we don't have it right now. I can only think of one or two places where you can live in Louisville and kind of get around without a car. I love it here, but there's sometimes that I dream about other places that I've been to and I'm like, man, I could just live in Amsterdam and have everything that I want, or can stay here and keep pushing. And so I love it here, so I want to see it happen. That's the kind of funding I would like to see.
So tell us how that brings together these issues that we're talking about: public health, housing, the climate crisis, because transportation is another one of those magic bullets that we don't have. Tell us how that addresses kind of all of those things, as well as equity.
Just being able, I mean, I don't know why the 15-minute city has become this politicized thing, and I don't totally get it, but the idea of creating these communities like we did back before the car was the main mode of transportation, and you walked or you rode a bicycle or took the trolley. Yeah. And being able to do most of that without having to get in a car and drive around is a really important way to reduce emissions, but people are healthier, and it's more equitable because everybody has access to different facilities, amenities, and things like that, not having to be forced to own a car or get in and go very far for everything.
Especially if you can't afford a car, or the maintenance that goes with it. And then when we pair that with the $13 million grant for trees in Louisville and the work that Brooke's doing, it becomes much more appealing to ride a bike or to stand out and wait for the bus to come. So I think that's a great point. I like this question. What is an underutilized design strategy that we should be thinking about? And I'm going to pitch this to Patrick first, and then I'm going to go to Brooke. Underutilized design strategy. Something that's known in the design world that maybe they do in California, right? But we've never tried here.
I mean, a simple one that comes to mind immediately is just parklets. Expanding the pedestrian environment so that there's more space for people to walk around and enjoy. You can go, almost every city I've been to has parklets, and a lot of them. And a parklet basically is taking over like a parking space for anybody that may not know already, or 2 parking spaces, and creating more of seating and things like that usually go along corridors where you have a lot of commercial activity. And unfortunately for us, almost all of our vibrant commercial corridors are state-run roads. And I've been working with the city off and on for, 10 years now, trying to figure out how to do this. And because of it being on state roads, they want to see this really high level of, we want to make sure nobody's going to get run over or something like that. They already are. I mean, yeah. So they won't let you put it on there. They want you to test it on another. I mean, it's been a fiasco, it feels like. And when I go to small towns and see these things, or you go just across the river in the smaller towns in our region, and they have them, it's just like, why? I mean, it's a simple thing, but
So tell me, how many millions of dollars does a single parklet cost?
It costs like $23,000 altogether if you're like for the bells and whistles. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome.
Well, and I would say one of my pet peeves is surface parking. I would love to see a study of how many parking spaces we really need in downtown Louisville. Like, what is the industry standard versus what is it that we have? I was in last year's Bingham Fellows class, and some of my classmates are here too, and it was, we talked about revitalizing downtown, but one of my friends in Philadelphia, they named them plazas. Like, how many concrete plazas do we have in this community? And how could we be greening those areas, making them usable, and how could we repurpose some of these surface parking lots and turning them into, a bigger parklet, but greening town and combating the urban heat island effect. I just feel like everywhere you walk in downtown Louisville, there's an empty surface parking lot sitting there.
And I want to throw back or do a shout out to Center for Neighborhoods and Rob, who was up here earlier, because their work around Better Block really addresses reactivating parking lots and reevaluating how many spaces do we need. And that was a whole process that was done in the Parkland neighborhood there by the community garden, right? Asking Dare to Care, how many spaces do you need, right? And accommodating that, and then reactivating the rest of that space. And it also gets to Patrick's point about how do we revitalize commercial corridors. And I like that one because that's a pretty easy economic development argument to make, and that will usually fly in whatever room you're in. So revitalizing small businesses means making the street more comfortable, having places for people to loiter and be, right, around small businesses. Also improves public health. We are doing great on time, but I do want to give each of the panelists an opportunity to share anything I haven't asked about, because you're all doing amazing work, and I know I haven't asked all the right questions. Sumeda, anything, what would you like to share? What do you want people to know about what the Office of Sustainability is doing that, and I know this personally, don't always do the best job of tooting our own horn, and I know how hard you work. What do you want people to know, and how can they support that work?
Sure. We need to get to net zero emissions by 2040 and 100% clean energy by 2040. That's about 15 years away. We're trying to cut emissions by half by 2030, which is about 7 years away. So there is room for everybody to do something, anything. We're desperate help. But yeah, so we, historically, our office has been pretty small, pretty stretched thin, and we're focused on energy because that's been kind of a gap that needed to be filled because of how much of our emissions come from the energy sector, and because we didn't have a dedicated city department necessarily focusing on that. But we also have so many other agencies at Metro working on reducing waste and improving green spaces and planning and zoning and all of these other things that are, and transportation, that are absolutely critical to this transition. So whatever, we are happy to collaborate on anything and everything. We don't always have the bandwidth to get everything done immediately, but we want to hear from people. We want to hear what the ideas are, what the low-hanging fruit is, and also what some of the harder things are that we have to keep pushing for, regardless of whether they're immediately achievable or not. So yeah, we will, an easy way to stay in touch with what we're doing is our monthly newsletter. We promise it is just once a month, no spam, and it's high quality. It is packed with, information about what's going on across Metro on sustainability. And shout out to Gianna Bennett, our communications person, who puts that together. But she does a really good job of generally helping everyone stay up to date with what's happening. So if there's things that we can use public input on, or jobs, if you want to join our team, and other things like that you could get involved with, that's a good way to stay in touch. But yeah, we're always looking for ways to collaborate and do better.
I hear Metro's looking for a brownfields manager if you know anyone. I do want to say that Samantha, I think the work that you've been doing, and especially with the newsletter, letting people know that there are things that Metro can't do. We Metro, I still say we, I'm sorry. There's things that Metro can't do, and certainly not with the staff and the funding that they have. It is totally reliant on community partnerships, and I would bet that everyone in this room has contributed to Louisville's energy goals in some way. How do we share that with people, right? Because all of that's happening and it all contributes to our goal. So please support Sumeda and her office and the amazing work that they do. So sorry, Brooke, go ahead.
Well, I know I kind of came to this conversation from a little bit different perspective, but once again, I feel like all of our work is so interconnected. I just want to say thank you to the folks that included me in this. And for me, I think that the recognizing, and I know I'm preaching to the choir, you know, the value of green space, the value to all of us of being in green space. And I have to say, I can't remember all these things, so I wrote some of them down, but, and of course now my thing's is messing up. People who live near parks are 44% less likely to have a diagnosed anxiety disorder. 20 minutes in a park improve the concentration of children with attention deficits to a level comparable to the children without those attention deficits. You know, people with access to safe parks exercise more and have lower rates of obesity, heart disease, and diabetes. As we think about, you know, as I listen to folks talking about affordable housing and making sure that our built environment is meeting these goals, I just would like to put in a plug for ensuring that there is access to green space. Thank you. And I would encourage, there's a really great Hidden Brain. You got the NPR show. There's a really great episode out there with a professor from the University of Chicago named Ming Kuo, K-U-O, called Our Human Nature. And it talks about, you know, once again, I keep thinking about you talking about we spend most of our time indoors. But it's like 25 minutes. It's amazing. But the thing that struck me the most about it is we spend hundreds of millions of dollars a year ensuring that our zoos have the environment that those animals need, and we recognize you can't take a lion and put it in a cage and give it food and water, expect it to survive. Well, we as Homo sapiens have lived in an urban environment for a millisecond of our time on Earth, and we can't expect to take people and put them in a concrete jungle and expect that and give them food and water and expect them to thrive. And so just every opportunity that we have, the project that Patrick is working on with the microforest is incredible. The work that Sumeda is doing is unbelievable. I just am here to just make sure that we're always trying to add green to everything that we're doing.
Thank you. What would you like people to know about your work, and how can the City of Louisville and the people here today help with that?
I'm so excited now to be part of the Environment Institute, because now I have more resources. I've been 2007, I don't know, what is that, 15? I've been doing this for a long time, but I finally have a team and people who are helping to move this along at the university, and we're working with a bunch of different departments. So it's amazing to be working with engineering and with biology and all these different groups on these projects, because it really takes like a multidisciplinary approach, and it's great to be able to have that in the university, but then also to reach out into the community. And you know, the health, you're talking about the funding and things like that. There's so much funding out there for health. So you have the NIH and the National Science Foundation and places that we're able to tie into for things like the Green Heart Project that we are working on. But it's going to be working with the community. And I feel like one of the things that I'm still trying to continue to do are these events that connect with people and just connect people to other people. So we do this Society of Urban Perambulators walks. that we do, and we go out into the community, and the last one we had like 60 people coming, which is a lot for a walking tour, but we walked around and we would just meet with people who live in the neighborhoods and who are trying to make the neighborhoods better, and just have this conversation for about 2 hours and try to start and stop at like local establishments. And it's a great way just to get out and get a little bit of exercise, but really I think for us to work together, it's going to be connecting with people in our community and understanding that we all have similar problems, and also understanding that some people might have a solution that we could use. And I think that that's the most important part of what I do, is trying to connect people to see how we can make it better.
That's beautiful. And I'll add that from the NREL perspective, it's a privilege to work with cities that are facing these challenges, and lots of cities are. Louisville's not unique, right? We're not the only city that was redlined or that has a low tree canopy. Lots of cities face these problems. Louisville, I think, is very unique in that there are so many organizations doing work to address these. And I think as we see those collaborations between those groups, whether it's for a grant, whether it's for conversation, whether it's to celebrate a new park, every time Sumeda submits a grant and she can talk about these things that are happening, that application is stronger because she's not working in a silo. She's working with the Parks Alliance. She's working with the Urban Design Studio and Envirome. And that's what we want to see from grant applications. And I think Louisville is very well placed based on the work that's been done in the last few years at Louisville Metro, as well as the ongoing work, very well placed to address these issues. We have the heart, we have the will, we're going to have the funding. So let's come together and address those issues. We are a little bit early, but I feel like we have had an amazing conversation, and I don't want to stand between us and drinks. So Reed, I'm going to turn it back over to you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you all. That was a wonderful discussion. And thank you, Allison. That was very, very pointed and thought-provoking questions. So thank you. She is correct. We actually did make it ahead by a couple minutes. So props to all of you. I do have a couple things that I'd like to say before we mosey on over. So first of all, thank you everybody for joining us today. We hope that you've had an insightful and an inspiring and action motivating day. Thank you for the time that you took to be here and learn and collaborate and connect with us. And to strengthen your passion for a more, sustainable, livable Louisville. So thank you. We'd also like to, again, thank our speakers and our moderators and panelists. Can we give them all one more round of applause? We'd also like to thank our sponsors again and LVA for this great space. Hopefully you guys can consider to use this for any of your events. And prematurely, but I think it's needed, is a thank you to 1512/portal and the exhibitors and the artists who are going to be putting on a wonderful after party for us. Thank you, Farm to Fork and all the other food donors for the food that they provided. And to the LSC board staff and planning committee. Can we thank LSC as well? Thanks. If you are a business or an organization and would like to learn more about partnering with LSC or any of the wonderful panelists or anyone else in the room for that matter, please reach out. We would love to hear from you. LSC is always looking for ways to, as Stuart said earlier at the very beginning, connect and convene. So, we're here to help make those sustainability connections. Just a few more points of order. So please, as I mentioned, there's the after party from 5 to 7. We're going to have heavy hors d'oeuvres. Seasonal from Farm to Fork is providing us. There is a cash bar. And there's an amazing art exhibit that was, as I mentioned earlier, curated specifically for our event. It's called the Sustainability Compass, North, South, East, and West. It was curated by Rebecca Norton and Claire Hearn, specifically for our event. The exhibit brings together a diverse group of individuals whose work is informed by the history and practices in sustainable thinking and design, and it uses the language and framework of the Sustainable Compass to build a discussion about the sustainable practices in the built environment. That was a lot of, how many times did I say sustainable? The other thing I'd like to mention really quickly is I mentioned at the beginning, we have these wonderful puppets, the element puppets. And they are actually going to be leading us in a parade, if you will, across the street to our event. So please join us for that and see how, I'm very curious to see how they move. So that's exciting. As you leave, we have the compost and recycling bin, so please take whatever is with you and put it in the respective bin. One more thing, if you're an AIA member, please come sit up in the front if you're staying for the meeting once we all leave. So thank you again. It's been a great day. I don't know about you, but I've learned a lot. Yeah. Enjoy your evening and please join us across the street. Thank you.